So let's start off with a bit of a classic to warm us up, the terracotta warriors. When laborers digging a well in China in 1974 discovered a life-size statue of a soldier, they had no idea how much more lay beneath them. Archaeologists started excavating and today think there are as many of 8,000 of these clay statues. Most are warriors, but there are full-sized horses and chariots as well, also dancers and acrobats. All figures have their own facial expressions and features unique to them. This vast terracotta army testifies the absolute power and great ambitions of the first emperor of China. Qin Shi Huangdi, who is buried in the tomb at the site, hasn't been excavated because of concerns about its stability. But if his burial record is any indicator, there are enough traps inside to make for an effective enough curse, notwithstanding the alleged curse the emperor himself placed on it. After all, it did take 700,000 workers 36 years to build this tomb, and supposedly many of those workers were buried alive inside to keep what's inside there a secret. And it's worked, no one knows what's in there. There's also the matter of the potentially cursed terracotta army. According to an interview on Swiss Info with one of the many men who accidentally discovered the emperor's army, there's a widespread belief that these statues were never meant to be seen by other men, and that would bring great misfortune onto the surrounding villages, all because it was a major disruption of the dead emperor's feng shui. While the Chinese government continues to protect the actual tomb, it will remain a mystery what sort of protection the emperor took with himself to the grave. How about a scary discovery and scary consequence? Tamerlane's tomb. As written in Atlas Obscura, Soviet scientist Mikhail Gerasimov woke up one day feeling spicy and felt like digging up a horrific conqueror Tamerlane to reconstruct his bashed-in face. So, ignoring the outcry of religious leaders, locals, Muslim clergy, literally anyone, these curious yet emotionally stunted anthropologists opened the tomb for the first time since 1941. Also ignoring 2 consecutive warnings on the tomb itself not to. The first is in plain sight outside of it: when I rise from the dead, the whole world shall tremble. The second was a surprise hidden within the tomb itself that nobody had opened before these dummies, and it said, "Whomsoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." Freaky. So naturally, they cracked the bad boy sarcophagus open. No consequences on the spot means none at all, right? 3 days later, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa and invades Russia. Few would argue that the push-broom mustache dictator would qualify as an invader more terrible than Tamerlane. Those that dispute the curse point out that Operation Barbarossa was always planned and subtly underway before the opening of the tomb, which is all well and good, but in 1942, Stalin demanded the return of Tamer to his tomb since the body had been taken. When the body was finally returned and buried with full Islamic rites, the Battle of Stalingrad's advantage shifted, changing the course for the Russians to win. So who knows, right? I think your own sudden imminent death counts as a scary discover. So, if so, King Casimir counts. And 50 years after the mysterious circumstances surrounding King Tut's exhumation, a similar incident occurred in Poland at the tomb of Jagiellon, where the King Casimir rests. Poland was a socialist country at the time of exhumation, so many types of research were restricted. It wasn't easy to receive an agreement to examine historical sites, and it took the Cardinal Archbishop of Krakow to support the researchers, who were just dying to get their hands on the shriveled corpse of the king, and for the final decision to be his to allow the opening of the tomb. Wrong call! Little did they know what they'd stumble upon. Researchers were eager to figure out more after the king's death 500 years ago, and they dug right in. It was worldwide news, as was the curse that the researchers kept joking about that was supposed to take their lives. Unfortunately for them, funny anecdotes become prophecies. As the examination was in process, those involved started to die from strokes and infections. Within the first few days, 4 are dead. Within years, around 15 are dead. Yeah, turns out they discovered deadly mold, the same as in Tut's tomb. As many historians have quietly mumbled about, there's always the possibility that maybe, just maybe, that mold wasn't something that grew over time, but was placed by a clever mixologist. Number 7 is Stonehenge, another you should know to expect to see on this list. Now, I won't bring up things like the Easter head, since we have sufficient evidence of human craft, but Stonehenge? On the table, so let's dive in. The circle of stone sits in the countryside of Salisbury, and it comes from the Neolithic period, which was the final division of the Stone Age. They stand alone, a vast meadow sprawling for miles around it. Having visited Stonehenge myself, I can tell you that you have the choice of a 20-minute walk or a 5-minute shuttle ride. The energy is very void, as if the air is free of static and just doesn't seem to move. I'm not trying to be dramatic, but it does truly feel unearthly. These stones weigh an average of 50 tons and are over 8 feet in height. They seemingly dropped into their ring, no rhyme or reason in their placement, at least to Swiss author Eric von Däniken, who suggests that they may be a model of the solar system that doubled as an alien landing pad. How Stonehenge is assembled is unknown to us. There's no documentation, no other ruins, no artifacts. There's genuinely nothing but these stones, some of which were somehow lifted feet upwards and placed horizontally on others. There's no way to know what it means either, but what we do know is that the stones are somehow perfectly aligned with solstices and eclipses, suggesting that the builders did know astrological charts and were able to keep an eye on the heavens. That's if they didn't come from them. Number 6 is interplanetary, but still alien to us, hieroglyphics on Mars. We've always talked about and conspired about aliens visiting us in ancient civilizations here on Earth, but what if they visited elsewhere? Or we have. Ooh, sorry, that's ghosts, not aliens. Anyways, the reason for that is some NASA photos were released in 2015 that were taken by the Curiosity rover. It shows what looks like some kind of writing or hieroglyphic on the rocks. A boxy 2 shape next to what looks like a curved Y with 2 other extending legs are side by side. While we can't be sure what the marks are at this point, it certainly has enthused ancient alien believers who claim that this is yet more evidence that aliens and ancient peoples visited one another. But skeptics argue the so-called discoveries on the images sent back by the rover are just textures in the rock. Despite the temptation of reading into evidence found so far, scientists' understanding of Martian history is still unfolding. Questions up for debate are, was the ancient Martian atmosphere thick enough to keep the planet warm and wet for the time necessary to nurture life? Are organic compounds found as signs of life, or simple chemistry that occurs when Martian rock interacts with our sun and water? What's your take? Hieroglyphics and conspiracy, or do you think they're just some cracked rocks? Up next is the City of the Gods, number 5. Teotihuacan is its actual name. This sprawling ancient city in Mexico is known best for its astronomically aligned buildings and complex pyramid temples. Their building was dated back 2,000 years, and scientists have suspected a mixture of cultures including Mayan, Zapotec, and Mixtec built the city so that they could house more than 100,000 people. They adorned it with murals, and they had a transportation system. Evidence shows advanced agricultural practices that earned the city a reputation of being much more technologically developed than should be possible in pre-Aztec Mexico. So naturally that brings us to the ideology of aliens, especially as the most massive temple, the Pyramid of the Sun, which is one of the largest constructions in the Western Hemisphere. It's also been noted that the alignment of the pyramids is based on calendar cycles. Many people believe that the flat-top pyramid served as a landing pad where the alien secrets lay inside the impenetrable walls. In 2003 though, a sinkhole caused by a flood led to the discovery of the Avenue of the Dead tunnel, connecting the Sun Temple with the Temple of the Plumed Serpent. People believe that this connection correlates with rituals and contacts shared between civilizations and aliens, these tunnels being used to transport sacrifice or make passage between the communication stations easier. Its name was given to it by the Aztecs when its deserted ruins were discovered sometime in the 1300s. It had already been abandoned for centuries at this point. When the name's translated, it means the place where men become gods, and why they chose to name it that, we're unsure. When the Aztecs found it, there was likely a great amount of discernible history available in contrast to today's standards. Perhaps they saw writings and stories that we didn't, something to make them believe in godly powers of the temples or the peoples. We know frustratingly little about this mysterious society, from the conditions of its rise to the circumstances of its collapse to its actual name. The Delphi site of Greece is number 4. Alien theorists love to use Greeks as a basis for their theories. This is because of the possibility of life beyond Earth is one that began in ancient Greek world, originating at least as far back as the 4th century BC, when ancient Greek society had schools of thought that speculated extraterrestrial life. One of the favorite examples is Delphi, Greece, where the stone masonry is eerily similar to that of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, which is believed to be a site of alien intervention. This was also the famous site of the Oracle of Delphi, a prophetic woman who would reside in the temple of Parnassus. She was rumored to have sat on a golden tripod over a fissure in limestone where she could breathe in the breath of Apollo and communicate with invisible forces. What she was breathing in, we aren't sure. According to toxologist Henry Spiller, both of the ways an oracle's vision would occur, either peaceful and slow or erratic and barely legible, are symptoms associated with inhalation of hydrocarbon gases, aka she could have just been zooted. But with the architecture as a star, alienologists jumped to say that this perhaps too could have truly been alien communication. The oracle was said to be possessed by Apollo in order to be asked prophetic questions about upcoming war, political actions, theories of life, and more. What if it wasn't Apollo, but rather she was channeling alien messages through an unconscious state, that the fissure had been a beam of alien power going into her? Maybe that explains why Delphi, Greece is considered one of the 3 major UFO sighting hotbeds in Greece. In fact, on June 3rd of 2012, this picture was taken and posted on a UFO forum, claiming the image to contain a UFO. What do you think, faux or fact? It's Coral Soup at number 3. And despite its significance now, the importance importance of this site wasn't determined until decades after its discovery. Hilariously, this is because of the sheer size and complexity of it deceived scholars, and many believe that the site was more recent, so they left it largely ignored. It's in 1994, Ruth Shady was studying the site, she realized the lack of pottery wasn't because of the recency, the site was just dated before the advent of pot firing technology. Radiocarbon dating on some of the woven bags found inside the pyramid confirmed that Coral Soup were the locus of some of the earliest population concentrations and corporate architecture in South America, dating somewhere around 2600 BC, which upended history's well-established timeline, pushing it back 4600 or more years. Now since then, other Notre Chico sites have been found that date several hundred years earlier, but at the same time Coral Soup was being built, so was the ziggurats in Mesopotamia and the step pyramids of Egypt, all incredibly similar structures. Ancient astronaut theorists believe that they could be profoundly connected, especially following the theory of ancient buildings such as these that tend to average around the 4500 age range. But the largest mystery of Coral Soup remains why it was abandoned so suddenly after thousands of years of inhabitation. There's no concrete evidence indicating a single event like an earthquake or large flood that ended this occupation. Number 2 is the Nazca Lines. These are a little more famous, so you may be familiar. They lay 320 kilometers southeast of Lima, and they cover a total length of 1300 kilometers of high and dry plateau. They are seemingly at random. Joining them are 300 geometric shapes and 70 figures of animals, including a spider, a monkey, a hummingbird, and a bizarre alien man figure. The biggest shapes stretch nearly 1200 feet across and are best viewed from the air. Scientists suspect that the Nazca drawings are as many as 2 millennia old, and because of their age, size, and visibility from above, and mysterious nature, the lines are often cited as one of the best examples of alien handiwork on Earth. I mean, how would an ancient culture have been able to make such huge designs in the desert without being able to fly? And why? The longest of the lines run straight as an arrow for miles, so some believe it would have acted as a landing strip. Perhaps the art was meant to be gifts of appreciation to the aliens so they may look down at them from above. So how did the ancients manage to create such a precise etchings from the ground without being able to fly? The only theoretical way is that people could have flown in the air at this time is with the form of a hot air balloon, as suggested by American explorer Jim Woodman. But we don't know for sure, so the Nazca Lines remain a fascinating enigma. But the explanation for how the Nazca Lines were physically created is quite simple. They're called geoglyphs. These enigmatic designs are made by removing the top rust-colored layer of rocks and exposing the bright white sand underneath. And for number 1, let's investigate the Sardinian giant. The Mediterranean's most important archaeological discovery of the 20th century was a complete accident and also unearthed a creepy conspiracy. When farmers are plowing their fields in 1974 in central Cabras, they hit something. That something turned out to be 5,000 fragments that underwent a painstaking and lengthy reconstruction process to form gigantic statues. 16 boxers, 6 archers, and 6 warriors. This colossal army of 26 statues has a height of 8 feet 2 inches and weigh an average of 880 pounds each. Each figure was carved from one limestone block alone. They have highly stylized features such as triangular faces, T-shaped eyebrows and noses, and their most distinctive features are their eyes. They're represented by large round circles that stare straight ahead and right into your soul. I imagine if they weren't built to be intimidating, they were anyways. Every photo I've seen feels like they see through you. This is one of the aspects that give the statues an alien look, fueling alternative theories about the ancient astronauts. What is certain is that the giants are surrounded by an aura of legend since their discovery, as they belong to the mysterious Nuragic civilization, which very little is known of. The lands of Sardinia are also dotted with their tombs, which are called tombs of giants. Why? Because they're huge! The burial chambers are 65 to 98 feet in length and 7 to 10 feet deep, and according to the various inhabitants of nearby cities, very large bones were found in the countryside surrounding their village. Some claim that they belong to men up to 11 feet tall. Legendary painter Muscus himself found the remains of a giant skeleton in a cave in 1972, when he was still a child, and made one of these claims himself. Interviewed repeatedly by journalists, locals stand by that any giant skeletons that have shown up or been shown to authorities or the experts when they are found almost always disappeared into thin air the next day. Sometimes, so did the finder.
Number 10. A frozen bird. Back in 2018, an extremely well-preserved bird was found in northeastern Siberia. This is fascinating. It was found near the village of Balaya Gora, and the bird itself was quite hidden, which explains its incredible preservation. It was found 150 meters meters into an ice tunnel, and the fascinating thing here, other than of course the, mummified bird, is that it looks like it died maybe a week ago, maybe 2. If I found this, I wouldn't look twice, to be honest. I would be like, ew, and I'd walk the other way. It's just a dead bird. Looks like a normal dead bird. Thing is, this bird froze 48,000 years ago. Yeah. Studying the birdo's DNA has given researchers insight on the end of the last ice age, so yeah, he's bringing some science, bringing some facts out of his, frozen corpse. Number 9, preserved wolf pup. When this little lady went into the ice 57,000 years ago, I bet she had no idea she would ever see the sunlight ever again. Discovered in Yukon, Canada, what's up? Zur is the most complete wolf mummy that has ever been found. Period. Not bad. Not bad, Canada. Okay, I see you. She's incredibly intact. She was discovered in 2016 by a gold miner while they were blasting water at frozen mud. What a job that ought to be, eh? Just blasting out history. They thought it was treasure, but really it was just this little lady instead, which in my opinion, still treasure. She's still a treasured, valued soul. She's quite old to us, but when she went into the ice, X-ray tells us she was only 6 weeks old. She was just a little baby, a little bubble. X-rays showed that she also loved fish, so she had an appetite as well before, life happened. Number 8, surgeon notebook. Whenever explorers find notebooks, I'm so interested, right? It's like history, written private history, just tucked away. It's fascinating. Maybe I've played too much Zelda, I don't know. But notebooks feel very, national treasure to me. You know what I'm saying? Hold it up to the light, see if it I like secrets. This notebook here once belonged to a surgeon. Now it's well over 100 years old. It was found in a frozen hut in Antarctica, and the owner was George Levick. He was a photographer and a surgeon, doubled as both, nice, fancy, and he traveled with the last expedition of Robert Scott. This was from 1910 to 1913. The book itself was completely frozen and the bindings were toast, obviously, but the parts that they can read today is pretty historical. You can still read descriptions of photos George took at Cape Adair. Descriptions of photos, that's, it's not the actual photo, but it's close enough. Imagine in 100 years you find a notebook and it's mine, just a bunch of cool S's, those like triangle of cool S's. I'm gonna draw one right now.
Number 7, the Black Sarcophagus. In July of 2018, in the ancient and wonderful city of Alexandria, a black sarcophagus was uncovered. Now, when I say black, I mean spooky Halloween scary black, which just begging not to be opened. It screams, don't open me. So, you can guess what we did next. We opened it, even though there have been warnings that it was cursed. What was inside was even more surprising. Once the 30-ton granite coffin was opened, there was 3 bodies inside marinating in a red-brown liquid. Ooh, gross. There was so much speculation about the coffin that a petition was started because some people wanted to drink the mystery liquid. Why? Don't, guys? No. Besides the necropolytic juice found inside, there was 2 men and a woman, which asked a lot of questions actually. It's kind of weird. At first I thought it was to be soldiers, but now we're not too sure. Number 6, body snatch. Imagine it's Victorian times, you just lost your spouse. Oh, tragedy. Sorry to hear that. Thoughts and prayers, brother. You've scrounged up the dollars to make a proper burial. Every so often you visit your loved one in their honor. It just makes sense, it's what you do. But however, one week you come back and see the grave has been disturbed. Uh-oh. You look in and see there's no body. You're heartbroken. That's awful. Who would do such a thing? Weeks later, you find yourself at a doctor's office where the doctor tells you he's learned so much since his cousin dug up a cadaver in the same plot as the land as your loved one. Ooh, yes, that's right, folks. Body snatching, stuff like this actually happened. Respectfully, of course, in Victorian London, where people made a good living to dig up corpses and deliver them to doctors for medical research. Medical research. Number 5, E.T. One day in 1983, the video game market crashed. Horrible. That would be awful for me. The home console market was oversaturated with companies trying to cut themselves a slice of the home console pie. Too many consoles, too many games, and a lot of which were just straight trash. Just garbage, dude. It's dog water, dude. There was no rating system or guidelines, so when you spent the price on a game, well, you really felt it. You just had to pray it was really good. The final straw was Atari, the great gaming company they are, making a movie tie-in game for the hit E.T. That's right, remember that movie? It's kinda weird. Verdict, it was also trash, and stood atop the mountain of filth that was the console market at the time, which caused an avalanche and eventually the crash of the video game market. Atari, feeling very silly after printing millions more cartridges than consoles, was left with a very large issue, and was going to need an extraterrestrial solution. The rumor for years was that they loaded up dump trucks worth of games that would never sell, mainly ET cards, and dumped them out into the New Mexico desert. It was thought to all be an urban myth. Spooky story to tell by the fire, why don't you? Well, in 2014, the carts were found. 700,000 copies worth. With inflation, this is millions of dollars, but at the same time, useless. Number 4, constellations. Space is amazing, and even though we are a minuscule part of that compared to the rest of the expansive universe, it is interesting to be a part of a large cosmic story. I think it is. We've been studying the skies for a long time, and we've come to understand that stars, well, they're really far away. It gets dark when you think that given enough time, the constellations we know now, because the universe is expanding, won't be here, which is so weird to think about. Or rather, what stars used to be, or used to light up the sky before the sky we know today. Given the science of optics, light, and physics, some stars we see right now may have already gone out, or fizzled out if you will, or deceased. Just seeing the light before it disappears finally from our eyes. That is so weird. That's crazy. You can see that when it's just gone. But it's been gone for a lot longer than you'd think. Oh, that's so crazy to think about. Number 3, vampire burials. If there's one thing I've learned during my time as an internet comedian, it's that history is messed up and people are crazy, especially from the past. Whoa! When it comes to burials, for the most part, humans have had respect for the deceased. Maybe except for some greedy people in Victorian London like I previously mentioned. However, all over Europe there have been discoveries of bodies found in peculiar situations. Some of these bodies were found with boulders on top of them, decapitated stones, or wood stakes prying their mouths open. That's so weird. Why such brutality even after they've passed, as most of these things were discovered to be done post-mortem? That's really strange. Well, that's because these folks have been thought to be vampires. Yes, vampires. The very same with pointy teeth and blood-drinking tendencies. It's amazing how far superstition can go. That's really weird. Number 2, black holes. Speaking of black holes, no, I'm just kidding. A black hole is a region of space-time where gravity is so strong that nothing, no particles or even electromagnetic radiation such as light, can escape from it. That's about as sciencey as I'm ever going to get on this channel, but the point is there really isn't anything darker than a black hole. Literally, like that's it, full stop. Naturally, as humans, the first thing we want to do is jump inside and see what happens. However, while no one is exactly sure, there's a good chance your molecular structure will be decombobulated and not put back together again. Ooh. Number 1, I think this is one of the darkest stories in history, I gotta be honest. The Radium Girls. In a nutshell, the Radium Girls were women working factories making glow-in-the-dark watches for the military. The catch? Well, the paint these ladies were using for the watches was radium based. Radium is radioactive and toxic. Small exposure here or there, sure, okay, no problem, you're fine. However, these women were told to keep the fine tip of their brushes by crimping it with their lips. Day after day, direct contact and ingestion of radium was not a nice discovery. Multiple ladies got sick, passed away, and in one case, which is the most heinous thing ever, one woman, her jaw fell off from radiation sickness. That's awful. Jesus. Oh, that's bad.
Let's start with the latest and the greatest. Number 10 is the latest Saqqara discoveries. So on January 26th of 2023, after a year-long excavation of the notorious Saqqara necropolis, 2 ancient tombs that date back to the 5th and 6th dynasty of the Old Kingdom are unveiled to the public. Zahi Hawass, who isn't my favorite person to cite, gave a statement on one of the mummies found. Kanohe Dedefe was a inspector of officials, supervisor of nobles, and a priest in the pyramid complex of Unas. Mehdi had many titles, one of them being the Keeper of Secrets, which is a title you'll hear again later in this video. This would also be a great time to take a second and subscribe to The Hive if you're a fan of discoveries such as these. Also found was a stone sarcophagus with a mummified man named Fatek, but the most important of the dusty corpses found was a gold leaf covered mummy. Hekashepes was found down a 15-meter burial shaft inside a large rectangular limestone sarcophagus. While other mummies have been found with this unusual coating choice, Hekashepes gets to take seniority. This mummy is the oldest complete mummy covered in gold, Hawass said in an interview, having led the excavation himself. The excavation team also found dozens of other valuable artifacts, including statues, some of which still have their original paint intact, as well as amulets, coins, earrings, rings, and tablets, all of which are currently being displayed at the Step Pyramid of Hawzer in Saqqara. Number 9 is the tomb special special of collecting crocs. Archaeologists excavating the Theban necropolis in Egypt made an extraordinary but unusual discovery, which was announced on December 20th of 2022. 9 crocodile heads placed inside 2 tombs belonging to high-ranking nobles. Archaeologist Patrick Chudzik told the Newsweek that the discovery was the first of its kind, as crocodile remains have never been discovered inside the tombs of Egypt, despite usually being found inside of temples or special catacombs. Dr. Chudzik explains, in our case, things are different. Firstly, only the heads and not the entire bodies of these Nile reptiles have been deposited in these tombs where we work. Secondly, they were not mummified, only wrapped in linen. There is a significant difference in this, as no preservatives were used. Finally, the remains were found in the tombs of humans, not catacombs of sacred animals. The tombs belonged to 2 top officials during the reign of the pharaoh Nefertiti Mentuhotep II. One being the Chancellor Cheti, a high official, but the occupant of the second tomb is actually still anonymous to us. Placing of the crocodile heads in the tombs, according to Dr. Chudzik, certainly was unusual, but not entirely unprecedented. He believes that earlier researchers paid scant attention to such finds that depict cultural practices but weren't treasures, stating that it's likely similar offerings had been placed in quite a few other tombs of rich individuals, but those offerings were discarded by the earlier researchers who discovered them. Number 8 is about the Ramessid Cemetery. So in April of 2023, the joint Dutch-Italian archaeological mission of the Saqqara archaeological site discovered the tomb of a person called Banhishia from the Ramessid period, the chief servant of the tomb of Aten. Alongside his tomb was the discovery of 4 small chapels, reinforcing the previous theories that suggest the reuse of the space between the tombs of the 18th dynasty in later eras and the constructions of tombs and chapels in that area during the Ramessid period of Egypt. The cemetery is a self-contained temple, having its own entrance and inner courtyard, as well as an underground burial chamber. Oddly, 2 out of those 4 chapels I mentioned were in dedication of a person that they don't recognize, called Yo-Yo. Endless inscriptions and scenes on the walls are distinguished by their accuracy and quality of detail. One in particular shows a scene of funerary procession of Yo-Yo in the process of reviving his mummy again in the hereafter to live in the afterlife as a god, in addition to a scene depicting the cow goddess Hathor and a boat of the god Sekhara, the god of the underworld. Inside the tomb, the mission found a stela picturing of Banhasi and his wife Baya, the singer of Amun, before a table of sacrifice and several drawings of priests and animals.
Number 7. Theory of evolution. Charles Darwin. We don't think of this man too often, for obvious reasons, but he had some ideas that were out there, right? In his book, The Origin of Species, written back in 1859, he explained how humans were evolved from the animal kingdom. And as if that wasn't already a handful of news, he also claimed that the world was much older than what everybody thought. And around the 1930s, that crazy idea was then accepted into the scientific community officially. Imagine being the first person to be like, I think we came from animals. I don't think we're aliens. I think we're actually animals. That's a hot take, right? Number 6, oxygen. Okay, speaking of hot takes, again, imagine being the first person to be like, what is this? What am I breathing right now? Why is this so good? What is oxygen? What is all this gas around us? Pretty hot take. That's a pretty bold thing to just dive into. Oxygen was identified for the first time scientifically by Joseph Priestley back in 1774. After he heated up red mercuric oxide, he found this colorless gas, and at first he called it dephlogisticated air, which is, it doesn't roll off the tongue per se. And Priestley shared his discovery with the French scientist Antoine Lavoisier. Lavoisier then connected these dots, and we learned that oxygen supports animal life. And us too. We don't mind air. Air's that's pretty nice. Number 5, not flat. Let's talk about the Earth for a hot second, shall we? Any guesses as to what shape it is? I'll tell you one thing, it's certainly not flat. Definitely not a flat planet. We can hit that thumbs up for not a flat Earth. We've known this since 1619, when Johann Kepler published the third law of planetary motion. Now this was a glorious day for the scientific community. This is when humans finally figured out that the Earth revolves around the sun and not the other way around. And also circular. That's also a great point to learn at the same time, that it's not flat. For sure not flat, definitely a circle. If you're a flat earther, hit that thumbs up. We're learning today, Number 4, Velcro. Alright, shout out to every guy out there with a Velcro wallet. Keep doing it, man. I still have mine from high school. I'll never abandon that thing ever in my life. It's still got some stick left in them. Who must we thank for Velcro? I use Velcro every day. I use them on my rock climbing shoes so I don't fall off the wall. And it's all thanks to a Swiss engineer named Georges de Mestral. And back in 1941, he found these burrs clinging to his pants and his dog's fur. He went for a walk and then he was covered in all those spiky balls. That's the worst, eh? That happens so often. We've all been there, but we've certainly never been inspired like George was. The word Velcro is actually a combination of velvet and crochet. Now these artificial hooks that stick on your clothes, they were heavily used by NASA first in the 1960s, and then for us, of course, when we weren't ready to tie our shoes. Number 3, the discovery of penicillin. Sometimes miracles happen when nobody's even in the room, right? It's like boiling water or something like that, you have to look away. A watched pot never boils. It certainly does though, you know? Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin back in 1928. Now at the time, he was actually studying Staphylococcus, bacteria that causes infections and boils and nasty stuff. But right before Alexander left for a 2-week vacation, he left a petri dish with some of that Staphylococcus just on the lab table, rather than stored away in an incubator. Turns out everybody here needed alone time because during this off time, a Penicillium mold spore just got the confidence to introduce itself to said bacteria. And now the room's temperature was also perfect. It was a lovely moment for everybody involved. Plus the emptiness of the room allowed for the mold to finally fight back in peace and prevent that bacteria from growing furthermore. He discovered this antibacterial substance was only produced by strains of Penicillium. Guy's like, all right, see you in 2 weeks. Comes back to a literal miracle. It's like, what? Number 2, the Trinity test. Not all of these are Velcro and fun and games, okay? Some science discoveries suck. When Americans heard that Germans were developing nuclear weapons, they joined in with their development on a project, most of it being done in New Mexico. So in 1939, President Roosevelt got scientists, military officials, this whole team of brilliant individuals to figure out how to use uranium as a weapon. The government eventually started to fund said research, which was happening at Columbia University, and in 1942, engineers from the Army joined in as well. And following Pearl Harbor, that's when President Roosevelt transitioned the project into a military branch officially, the Manhattan Project, made with the strict goal of weaponizing nuclear energy. There are facilities in New Mexico, Tennessee, Washington, even here in Canada, you name it. But come July 16, 1945, the Trinity test was conducted. The first atomic weapon was detonated in a New Mexico desert and it was deemed a success, with mushroom clouds reaching as high as 40,000 feet. It was, yeah, that was definitely life-changing, for sure. And finally, number 1, Coca-Cola. All right, we'll finish on a nice sweet note. Let's do it. Every time it's the holiday season, I see nothing but Coca-Cola ads. I don't know how they do it. They've somehow tapped into the entire holiday season. But how does such a syrup come to be in the first place? We'll end on this one so we can all grab a drink immediately after the video ends. I got you, I know how to do this. Inventor and pharmacist John Pemberton originally set out to cure headaches, which is pretty ironic. 2 main ingredients, of course, being coca leaves and cola nuts. Now, things were boring, dare I say, until his lab assistant accidentally mixed the 2 with carbonated water. And then, poof, it's a miracle. It's like they knew, it's like they were from the future and they're like, hey, trust me, I got us. Over time, you throw in this top secret recipe, which we still don't know, and now we have a movie theater essential, and one of my favorite soft drinks, Coca-Cola. Personally, actually, I'm lying. I'm a Dr. Pepper guy, if anything. 23 flavors? How in the world do they get it in that little can? If we get a part 2, I'll throw Dr. Pepper in. There you go.
Let's start with how everything we knew is now wrong. The oldest known practice changed, because archaeologists may have uncovered evidence for the oldest known practice of mummification. Human remains interred 8,000 years ago in the Sado Valley of Portugal appear to have been deliberately treated for mummification prior to burial, making them the first evidence of Mesolithic mummification in Europe. The Sado Valley remains, uncovered in the early 1960s, have very little soft tissue at all, making visible identifiers of mummification not so apparent. Although obviously deliberately placed, the burials had been considered pretty straightforward. The remains were brought to the National Museum of Archaeology in Portugal along with the sketches and some rather poor quality photographs of the site, which limited the follow-up study all those years later. Recently, however, following the death of archaeologist Manuel Farina dos Santos, 3 rolls of films were recovered from his personal effects. The images images captured therein were of exceptional quality and allowed the 2022 research team to conduct a more in-depth analysis that had not been possible previously. The results of these experiments could then be compared to the Sato Valley remains, and even without soft tissue, the remains of one individual showed definitive signs of mummification. These included hyperflexed limbs, an absence of disarticulation, and rapid sediment infill around bones. In January of 2022, it was announced a big ol' mummy family had been found. Hidden in a fire-scorched structure off of the Nile is a 2,000-year-old family tomb, and inside, 30 mummies of various ages. Though the archaeologists have yet to date the tomb, they suspect a single family buried their dead in it over generations spanning from the Ptolemaic and Roman periods. That's 1st century BC to the 2nd or 3rd century AD. Some of the mummies were very well preserved, while others had their bandages and cartonnage cut by ancient robbers. This new tomb, which was made up of 4 deeply excavated chambers, is one of more than 300 recently discovered surrounding the mausoleum of Aga Khan. And while most of the other tombs were found underground or dug into rocky hills, this particular tomb was an above-ground structure, which the researchers think likely was used as a place of sacrifice, thus the flame-burned walls, animal bones, plant remains, and offering tables. Archaeologists and researchers alike insist this is merely only the beginning of their discoveries. Guess what, y'all? New Saqqara tomb dropped! Saqqara, for those who don't know, was an active burial ground for more than 3,000 years and is a designated UNESCO heritage site. It sits at what was once the ancient Egyptian capital of Memphis and is home to more than a dozen pyramids, including the Step Pyramid, near where the shaft containing the newest discovered mummy was found. Archaeologists say they have found a gold leaf-covered mummy sealed inside a sarcophagus that has not yet been opened for 4,300 years. The mummy, the remains of a man named Hekafshepes, is thought to be one of the oldest and most complete non-royal corpses ever found in Egypt. It was discovered down a 50-foot shaft at Saqqara, where 3 other tombs also were. The largest of the mummies is Kanamgadajif, a priest, inspector, and supervisor of nobles. Next was Mary, who was a senior palace official given the title of secret keeper, and the last was a judge and writer named Fatek. Several other items, including pottery, have also been found among the tombs. All of the finds date to the 5th and 6th dynasties of the Old Kingdom, approximately 25 to 2100 BCE. In addition to the mummies, the excavation revealed statues, wall paintings, amulets, tools, and potteries. Hawass is especially interested in a variety of statues uncovered during the dig, as they offer insight into the art of the Old Kingdom. Point number 7. The Columbian Exchange refers to the exchange of diseases, food crops, and populations between the New and the Old World following the voyage to the Americas by Christopher Columbus in 1492. During this time, new metal supplies, both precious and functional, are discovered and exchanged. The Old World gained new staple crops such as tomatoes, chilies, cacao, peanuts, and pineapples, which are now culinary centerpieces in many Old World countries, namely Italy, Greece, India, Korea, and more. Tobacco, another New World crop, was so universally adopted that it even became a substitute for currency in places. The exchange not only brought gains, though, it also brought massive losses, as you would later discover. Dolbins writes that before the invasion of peoples in the New World by pathogens that evolved among the inhabitants of the Old World, Native Americans lived in relatively disease-free environment. Before Europeans initiated the Columbian exchange of germs and viruses, the peoples of the Americas suffered no smallpox, no measles, no chickenpox, no influenza, no typhus or parathoid fever, no diphtheria, no cholera, no bubonic plague, no scarlet fever, no whooping cough, and no malaria. That is a pretty awesome track record, so go Indigenous Americans. That no bathing habits of the Europeans had brought diseases to a previously isolated community that had no disease immunity, causing devastation beyond that even of the Black Death in 14th century Europe. On the subject of disease, a terrifying one was discovered during this age. Number 6 is itchy and burning. While there's an obvious grocery list of diseases that the Old World brought to the New, there were very few examples of diseases being spread from the New World to the Old, except the one main exception, syphilis, listed as one of the 12 diseases that changed our modern world. While it's pretty tame now, back in the 15th or early 16th century, fatal! And it was ugly fatal too. Warts, ulcers, rash, tumors, dementia, then bam, dead. It evolved over time to become pretty benign by the 17th century, more how it is nowadays. But society is still pretty stumped on where the origins of the disease are, leaving it to 2 theories. The Columbian hypothesis suggests that Columbus and his crew picked it up in Hispaniola, where the indigenous peoples had a natural immunity to it but passed it through intimate contact. Upon returning to Spain, some of the crew joined the campaign of Charles VIII of France and laid siege to Naples in 1495. They only exposed the local populations of working girls, which amplified the disease's transmission. The second theory, the pre-Columbian hypothesis, asserts that the disease had always existed in the Old World, and during their conquest, something in the new environment triggered a more severe reaction of it. It's very possible the reason there was no accounts of syphilis before the 1490s is because beforehand they couldn't differentiate it from other diseases with similar symptoms. Regardless, within 5 years of its arrival, the disease was viral in Europe. Syphilis reached Hungary and Russia by 1497, Africa, the Middle East, and India by 1498, China by 1505, Australia by 1515, and Japan by 1569. And that population devastation leads to the worst of mankind, which is number 5. Regarded as a glorious era by Europeans, it couldn't be anything less of a nightmare for African and indigenous populations, who were the largest sacrifice of this conquest. The disease killed the indigenous peoples too quickly for the colonizers' liking. Upward to 80 to 95% of the indigenous population was gone within the first 100 to 150 years following 1492. They had been using us for forced labor, and the colonizers weren't about to farm their own land or build their own houses, and now there's labor shortages. So they decide to steal people from another continent. A demand for labor was met with the stealing and forced movement of over 12 million Africans during the 16th to 19th century. The first transatlantic voyage delivering captured African peoples to the New World, specifically Brazil, was completed in 1526. They would become the first of the estimated 4.9 million Africans transported to Brazil over the ensuing 3+ centuries, more than any other country in the world. To give a comparison, about 400,000 were shipped directly to North America. Often overlooked is the role of New World forced laborers. Whether it was indigenous or African, it went well past agriculture. Yes, it's planting and harvesting coffee, tobacco, coca, sugar, and cotton, but it's also the dangerous mining of precious metals, cutting timber for ships, constructing infrastructure, and domestic servants. The oppression of these two groups, their cultures and religious beliefs, has led to damage we're still undoing. Intergenerational traumas, political battles, social rejection, the list goes on. Education on this subject, no matter how uncomfortable it may be to hear sometimes, is absolutely crucial. Number 4, we take a look into the monstrous maps they used to navigate these high seas. The soldiers, sailors, and merchants and other adventurers who adventured into uncharted seas and land encountered beasts they'd never seen, lush and even frightening landscapes, and heard tales of mysterious people and their ways. Many of these experiences found their way onto the maps describing the new land. Cartographical researcher Chet Van Duzer explains that monsters began to appear on maps for a variety of reasons, one being that cartographers' fear of Horavaku, aka blank space, on the map. They filled in unknown spaces of uncharted land with artistic renderings of animals, plants, angels, and other things. Another reason was that artwork enhanced the map's visual appeal. Cartographers and their artists often made up creatures to increase the excitement of the map and in turn increase sales. If cartographers did not know what was in a particular area but assumed or had heard from sailors and other travelers' stories that it was most likely dangerous, they'd make sure to X-mark that spot with the demonic deity doodle. Dory Klein of the Boston Public Library explains that people didn't really know what was out there, and their corpus of knowledge came from folklore and the Bible. In that world, monsters could very well be real, and they were just part of this supernatural landscape. The beasties took on many forms: physical, geographical, and fantastical. Maps of unknown lands of the globe were marked with volcanoes and shipwrecks and megafauna and winged beasts, treacherous shores, leviathans, horned creatures, and giant squids. And it was on many maps you could find the Mystery King, who will be number 3 on the countdown. The motivation behind about 90% of the Portuguese exploration that inaugurated the Age of Discovery was the one mysterious dude named Prester John. Not to be that guy, but that literally sounds like a name made up on the spot. And that's what people have been trying to figure out for centuries. Was this guy real? The Portuguese hoped to find this legendary, immensely wealthy king who was rumored to rule over an advanced Christian kingdom in the east, as they wanted to form an alliance with him against the Muslim Crusaders. Rumor of the king's rule circulated from a letter sent to the Emperor of Rome in 1177 from a man named Prester, whose letters described how his crime-free, peaceful kingdom was being besieged by barbarians, and he needed the help of the Christian European armies. In 1177, Pope Alexander III sent his friend Master Philip to find Prester John, but he never did. By the 14th century, exploration had proved Prester's kingdom was not in Asia and turned to Africa, but once again they found nothing. The legend lived on as cartographers continued to include the kingdom of Prester John on maps throughout the 17th century, and the Spanish continued to send voyages to seek out the man and his potentially mythic kingdom. Though some scholars think the basis for Prester John came from the great empire Genghis Khan, others conclude it was merely fantasy. Either way, Prester John profoundly affected the geographical knowledge of Europe by stimulating interest in foreign lands and sparking expeditions outside of the country. And speaking of mysterious lands, here's the story of how Magellan's voyage ended. It's number 2. Although it was never officially part of his mission and it cost $0 to mind his own business, Magellan took great pains to convert all the indigenous people he encountered to Christianity by whatever means necessary as usual. The most notable example came in April of 1521 in the Philippines, where he baptized King Humabon of Cebu along with thousands of his subjects. Magellan's religious fervor became so strong by the time he'd reached the country, he threatened to kill chieftains that resisted converting to Christianity and making their community do so as well. When a king named Lapu-Lapu refused to convert, Magellan's men barricaded families into their home and burnt the village on the island of Macan. Magellan, determined to have his way, later returned to the island with 49 men and demanded Lapu-Lapu yield to his authority. The king refused, disgusted and fed up, and decided it was throwdown time. Magellan is killed just so fast. He's struck by a spear and then descended upon by a mob of islanders that hack him to death. In the Philippines, where he's remembered accurately as a tyrant, the Battle of Mactan is reenacted every April 27th. His sudden death is the reason Magellan cannot be cited as the first man to circumnavigate the globe. While he organized the voyage and negotiated the treacherous South American Strait across the Pacific, credit for the successful trip should also go to the mariner Juan Sebastian Elcano, who commanded the return voyage of the Victoria. And now for number one, I'd say one of the scariest discoveries is explorers and their eerie endings. So obviously, I just told you about Magellan, there's gonna be some more. Encouraged by the Spanish crown to discover more islands, Ponce de Leon followed rumors that he had heard from indigenous Puerto Ricans about an island called Bimini, home to a magical spring whose waters kept you youthful forever. It led him to Florida, where he failed to find the fountain of youth, but a poison arrow found his thigh. Remember Balboa, who's found an ocean as if they're hard to miss? Well, Vasco Balboa died because he was feuding with his boss, governor of Darien, Pedreras, who had taken Balboa's title a little after he'd fallen out of the king's favor. These two couldn't sort out their differences, even when Balboa became Pedreras' son-in-law. The man's jealousy led to him having Balboa arrested and imprisoned on false charges of rebellion. He was very quickly tried for treason against the crown, found guilty, and beheaded on January 21st of 1519. Giovanni de Veranzo, a French explorer, was the first European to sight New York. He had his final voyage in 1528 when he sailed with his brother from Dieppe to Florida, the Bahamas, and finally the Lesser Antilles. Here, he anchored off one of the islands, apparently Guadeloupe, went ashore, and was immediately captured and killed by an indigenous colony who, let's say, had a very filling dinner that night. February 1779, Captain James Cook, the great English explorer, is killed by native Hawaiians during his third visit to the Pacific Island group. While they were welcomed the first two times, the second time had brought disease that had killed the Hawaiians en masse. So when they showed up the third, they were not very welcome. And of course, one of the most famous stories is how Hudson's crew set him adrift on what's now Hudson's Bay because he wouldn't cut him a break. He's loaded up into a dinghy with crew members that he'd given special treatment to, and none of them are ever seen or heard from again. Let's begin with the hilarious story of the ancient garden decor. Alrighty, so an article published on June 19th of 2023 tells the tale of how in the first weeks of the month, an everyday British dude in Hertfordshire, England, was just perusing the flea market and found an inconspicuous kind of bamboo looking thing. Assuming it's some scrap metal but finding it cute, he bought it for 25 bucks, brings it home, tosses it in the garden as decorative rockery, and life moves on. Now the person who bought it requested anonymity, so we don't actually know how he came to realize that it wasn't just some metal. He brought it to Hanson's auctioneers and, unaware of its true historical significance, was left dumbfounded when the auctioneers revealed that it was a hand cannon, a rare type of bronze powder weapon that dated back to the 1400s. These devices were pivotal in the development of weaponry during the Middle Ages and originate from China. On June 15th, the hand cannon, previously acquired for essentially pocket change, was auctioned at Hanson's auctioneers with an estimated value of $2,500 to $3,750, more than 100 times of the cannon's purchase price at the flea market. The origins of the artifact remain shrouded in mystery, including how it came into the hands of the flea market seller, but traces of soil residue imply it was unearthed at some point. These archaeological students went dumpster diving for mummies. News of this dropped early June of 2023 after archaeological students from San Marcos University removed 8 tons of trash in the Ramak region of Lima to reach a rare mummified Peruvian body from the ancient Manche culture. The excavation, led by Dr. Miguel Aguilera, said in a Reuters press release that the team first spotted the mummy's hair and skull. He goes on to explain that the mummy had been carefully carefully wrapped in a cotton and vegetable fiber burial cloth and had been laid out flat, which is characteristic for the Manchu culture of the formative era, between approximately 1000 BC and 200 AD. This person was also discovered at the center of an Ushnu. It's a U-shaped stonework that's oriented towards the rising sun, representing the point of connection between Earth and the realm of spiritual energy. From what Miguel has examined, the body was found offered as a sacrifice during the last phase of construction of this temple. This is called a foundation ritual, which were significant in South America, Egypt, the Baltics. If you saw my video, The Top 10 Terrifying Urban Legends with Historical Backgrounds, you may know the specific foundation ritual they called Hitobashira in Japan. While every culture has practiced it and had its own name, the act was to place a person, live or dead, where the foundation of a building is to be laid and bury them beneath. Based off the mummification, unlike the poor peasant woman buried beneath Maruka Castle, this person was deceased pre-ritual. Alrighty, so this next point will actually tie into the one after it. So first up is the drought remains, part 1. March 18th, 2023, Catalan leader Pere Aragonés said that Barcelona and the surrounding region are dealing with one of the worst droughts in 50 years, which has led to the remnants of the famous Santa Roma to emerge for the first time since the dam was built in 1963 and drowned the town. You may not recognize the town by its name, but the picture of the half-water immersed church is actually pretty notorious online. Now revealed is the full structure of the church, an empty cemetery, and the foundations of other buildings and homes. The Romanesque church was consecrated in 1062. As beautiful as this is, like the Canadian wildfires, the drought is the earth trying to speak. For the first time, the Saw Reservoir is currently only 10% full, and access to the area has been restricted. Before now, those screenshots popped up online about how navigation apps inadvertently were saying people were submerged in water when they were standing on dry land. So, here is what the church looked like before and now after. This isn't good, guys. Spain's government warned about the eventual need for emergency measures to conserve water, and officials said the reservoirs connecting to the Ter Llobregat River, which provides the main water supply for Barcelona, have shrunk to 27% capacity. Call Guinness World Records because this tomb has the most curses per square foot dead body paradise. Saqqara is genuinely called the ancient city of the dead, and you may have heard of it since it's right up there with King Tut for Egyptian burial site hotspots to visit. Its origin traces all the way back to the First Dynasty, where it hosted burials for more than 3,000 years before seeing its last ceremony and resting sealed for centuries. And with how Egyptian family goes, 3,000 years of royal burials can accumulate quite the cast of characters, many of whom would want to protect themselves and their riches in the afterlife. Essentially, when archaeologists got down there, they had to send the most cynical, non-spiritual MFs they had. There is so much buried there that they turned up over 160 different sarcophagi and countless precious artifacts, not complete without a few curses inscribed, of course, to prevent grave robbers or genuinely F up anyone who enters the chamber. Akhmahora's sarcophagus essentially warns that whatever's done against his tomb, the same shall be done onto your property. It also warns that any impure trespassers will be filled with the fear of seeing ghosts. Seriously, immerse yourself in excavating here though, surrounded by 160 mummies deep in the earth, curses and condemnations? Nah. How about a recent discovery that shows us there's still so much out there? The Notre Dame tombs. This month, 4 years ago. Pause. 2019 was 4 years ago. Let me sit with that for a second. Whew, okay, well, in April of 2019, many of us opened our phones or turned on our TVs to a massive shock. The Notre Dame was burning. The 12th century Gothic cathedral was saved by 500 plus firefighters, but had a major structural damage. French authorities call in archaeologists to help make sense of the damage and how to start repairs. They find something else. 2 coffins, sculptures, statues, and unseen architecture. After months of research and scans, they figure out one identity because it turns out to be written on the outside the whole time. Antoine de Pelaporte, a high priest who died in 1710 at 83. In the 300 years since he was buried, his coffin was damaged and allowed air to enter, so he was mostly bones and some bits of hair instead of a mummy. The other coffin is Mr. Unknown, and he's rocking mummy vibes. Check him out. He died between ages 25 and 40 from TB, and his pelvic bone region suggests he was a horseback rider. To be buried in the Notre, he's obviously an aristocrat, and he was buried with a flower crown, which is super cute. Both men were buried in lead sarcophagi, which was a practice reserved for the elite. Still, the 2 coffins are also quite different from each other, and this shocking find tells us the Notre is still full of secrets to uncover, and if there's 2, there's safe to assume there's more. A Grecian cemetery holds terrible secrets at the bottom of a well. The Karmikos cemetery dates all the way back to the Bronze Age, so around 2700 BCE. It was first excavated by archaeologists in 1870, and since 1930, excavations have continued and thousands of tombs uncovered. As you can imagine, through years of excavations, lots of messed up things have been discovered, discovered in said tombs. Weird bodies, weird deaths, buried alive, and now in 2020, a collection of 30 inscribed lead tablets were found at the bottom of a well that's 2,500 years old. Which sounds creepy enough as is, but the tablets each bear individual curses and prayers to Greek gods of the underworld. AKA it's like Grecian culty Satanism stuff, as well as the fact that the well was poisoned and in the middle of a tomb yard. Jutta Strokazek, who led the excavation, said that whoever ordered the curses inscribed on the tablets was unnamed, but the black magic is present and there for all to see, even if forbidden in Greece at the time. And while the well was only just found in 2016, as mentioned, the site was first excavated in 1870. But progress halted when World War II broke out, as all members of the excavation team joined the forces, and then every single one died back to back to back. While it's hard to pin that on the curse itself, it does follow the trend set by King Tut and Casimir. A recent discovery changes the history of the Philippines, the Los Milania tombs. Our world still has discoveries to be made, and archaeologists have proven that when they unearthed the remnants of a 1,000-year-old village on a jungle mountaintop in the Philippines. I'd say this is more of a shocking tomb discovery than scary. I'm just excited about this. The game changer is the discovery of limestone coffins, a type that's never been found before in Southeast Asia. This is huge because it's the first indication that Filipinos at the time in history practiced more advanced burial rituals than previously thought, and that they had metal tools to carve these coffins, which we didn't know before. While they're similar to ancient sarcophagi, the tombs differ by being simple, without elaborate decoration or images on the tops or sides. They're just a plain, classy box. And a tooth extracted from one of the skeletons, carbon data confirm they are about 1,000 years old, with 15 graves found in total. Overall, this site is described as a complex archaeological site with both habitation and burial remains from a period of approximately 10th to 14th century. It's the first kind in the Philippines having these limestone advancements. Malalaini tourism officer Sammy Cortez says after the archaeologists have finished their work, they're gonna open this up as an archaeological site you can visit, the same as the Tut's tomb. For my Twilight fans, you may get your kissing a vampire fantasy, seeing as there are vampire graves in Bulgaria. And it's not even like one, there's a couple. Archaeologists in Bulgaria have uncovered a 13th century corpse at Perpykion, an ancient Thracian site in the south of the country, belonging to a man in his 40s who had the misfortune of a big ol' iron rod stomped through his ribcage with the purpose of keeping the corpse from rising from the dead and disturbing the living. Oh, and his left leg had also been removed and placed next to the corpse. Insult to injury, they're making sure he can't go anywhere. At the time of the man's death, vampires were perceived as a real threat in many Eastern European and Balkan communities. People who died usually from things like taking their own lives or being fine one day and dying the next in their sleep, for example, were sometimes staked to prevent them coming back from the dead because it was an unnatural death. Amongst the Romani people, anyone who was missing a finger, had an appendage similar to those of an animal, or had a horrible appearance, yikes if you're ugly, was regarded as someone who is dead. In Russia, those who talked to themselves were suspected of being a vampire in nature, so I guess I might be a vampire because that's essentially kind of what I'm doing right now, isn't it? To date, nearly 100 skeletons have been found across Bulgaria, nailed into their coffin with iron stakes or with heavy bricks and stones placed in open mouths. As I've mentioned in many of my recent demon and ghost videos, if multiple cultures report the same creature and the same method of execution for the thing, even before meeting each other, I'm inclined to maybe believe this was real. This tomb hides dirty laundry and family secrets, the New Grange and Douth tombs. It starts with a dirty story. 11th century Meath County, Ireland, a salacious folktale is passed down for 4,000 years, saying an ancient king who hailed from the tribe of the gods did some stuff with his sister on the winter solstice as part of a magical ritual to restart the sun's daily cycle and save the world from endless night. Supposedly, the deed was done in one of the country's huge burial mounds, which the locals have named the Hill of Sin. The hill is now called Douth Passage, a close neighbor and connected to the New Grange Passage. Its entries are marked with large stones, and on every winter solstice, the sun shines through and lights up the innermost burial chamber. This is supposed to be the result of the magical act that the king performed there. And nearly 1,000 years after the local legend was first written down, ancient DNA suggests to discover that at least part of the story, naturally the grossest part, was actually true. See, the New Grange Passage is a tomb of over 150 kilometers for a well-connected family according to an ancient DNA analysis. Like a prehistoric version of the Habsburgs, this extended group of relatives seems to have ruled Ireland and maintained its connected dynasties for centuries within the family. Rulers only tend to marry their siblings in societies where the king is actually considered a god, who whose perceived divinity exempts them from social custom. The winter solstice claim probably helped these rulers support their godly claim and rally effort it took to move 200,000 tons of rock to build a passage like the New Grange. That's something the pharaohs of Egypt, the kings of pre-colonial Hawaii, and the Inca emperors had in common. This cave tomb discovery is a new breed of human, Homo floresiensis. Once upon a time, on the isolated Isle of Flores, Indonesia, there lived a colony of little people. Very little people. Liang Pananing is a cave on the island of Sulawesi that is part of an island grouping called Wallachia, which ancient humans traveled through at least 50,000 years ago as a meeting point for the major admixture mating event between the Denisovans and the modern humans on their initial journey to Oceania. Here, anthropologists find 7 remains of 3-foot-tall humans with brains the size of grapefruits, suggesting these 18,000-year-old specimens weren't a quirk of ancient Homo hominin, but rather an entire species of miniature people who existed and overlapped with modern Homo sapiens. Although the odd little humans likely left no descendants and therefore no mark on human biology now, scientists say this is the first documentation of an entirely new species of Homo hominins that apparently adapted and lived for thousands of years in caves on the isolated island. As for their size, their limited habitat and its hot humid conditions may have been the key factors. They may have arrived on the island as African or Asian Homo erectus and their generation shrank over time. Genetic size adaptation would make sense for survival. Similar factors were also at play for the pint-sized stegodon elephant, whose remains were also found in the cave with the tiny people. Evidence suggests that they hunted the miniature elephant-like creatures in groups. Imagine being the person who uncovers a tiny race of humans. Now that is a discovery, and I'm gonna be keeping up to date with this one. Number 10 will be the Patagonian giant. As you'll soon learn, the Europeans concocted many stories of debatable origins when exploring remote and exotic places, because why not? Nobody else had ever been there except them, so if they wanted to say there was an island full of dog-faced men or one-eyed people, which is a real thing one chronicler tried to claim, then they could. The story of the Patagonian giants is a great example of this that's still dicey in history. It comes from the famous Ferdinand Magellan expedition, which was his attempt at being the first explorer to have circumnavigated the globe. Ferdinand was not, in fact, the first to do so, but that'll be a later point in the video. So, in the 1520s, near today's coast of Porto San Julian, Argentina, Ferdi and his crew were anchored when, to quote their chronicler Antonio Pigafetta, "We saw a giant who was on the shore, quite naked, who danced, leapt, and sang. Our captain sent one of the men towards him, charging him to leap and sing like the other, in order to reassure him and show him friendship. They were able to interact with the man, and they met a few others of these giants, all of which were proclaimed to be over 8 feet tall. After befriending these giants, Magellan supposedly tricked one of them into boarding his ship and stole the man. The giant was later baptized and named Paul, but he died during the fleet's long crossing of the Pacific Ocean. Historians believe that the giant were a member of Telehuche, which was a naturally tall native to southern Chile and Argentina. The voyage that the poor giant died during would have been, as said, across the Pacific Ocean, which is number 9. Vasco Núñez de Balboa of Spain had been in the New World for years, including an unsuccessful stint as a planter and pig farmer in Hispaniola. To escape debtors there, he stowed away in a barrel with his dog on a ship. Somehow, through a matter of a few years, he goes from being a loser sharing a barrel with a wet dog to Adventure Balboa of Spain, leader of expeditions off to find gold for the Spanish crown. Balboa, on his conquest, established the first stable settlement on the South American continent of Darien and Panama. While arguing about, shocker, gold with one of his homies, an indigenous community member overhears, and I guess he was about up to here with colonizer crap that day, because he explained, if you are so hungry for gold that leave your lands and cause strife in those of others, I shall show where you can quell this hunger. Ooh. So anyways, this badass dude told Balboa of a place where people drank out of goblets of gold, but warned that 1,000 men would be required to conquer clans living inland and along the coast and the other sea. Despite the manpower, supply, and brain cell shortage, Balboa departed on September 1st, 1513 to attempt this. On September 25th, he reached a summit from where he saw a vast ocean as the man had described. Balboa triumphantly waded into the water, raised his sword, and claimed the new sea and all adjoining lands for Spain. A bit presumptuous, no? If you want to hear more about historical power and greed, BumbleBee covers quite a bit of it, so be sure to take a second to subscribe drive to the hive. And since we're talking about the ocean and traveling it, let's do how bad sea life was for number 8. So, life was pretty difficult for a sailor in the age of exploration. To give you an idea, journeys could take years. Ships only covered about 100 miles a day, and the pay was poor. For example, the crew on Columbus's journey only made $10 a month in today's money. And these crews worked around the clock in shifts minding the ship. Disobedience of any kind led to harsh punishments from captains, but then each captain would have different rules for their ship. You're better off seasick than hungry though, that's for sure. Sailors only consumed about 3,000 calories a day, which they got from 1 pound of salted beef or pork. If meat rations are low, then you could expect the comfort food classic that makes us all think of mom and warm hug. Flour mixed with fat. You get 1 lib of hardtack, which, don't worry, was infested with weevils and bugs, but you can eat those as additional food, 2 for 1, guys. Vitamin deficiencies naturally gave men scurvy, rotted teeth and gums, open sores, and even mental breakdowns. It was common to lose 50% of a crew to that disease alone. But if the diet didn't kill you, there were plenty of other things that could. Sailors had 1 set of clothes that were rarely washed because they thought dirt and grease provided protection from wind and rain. Lice, rodents, and foul drinking water spread typhoid. Ships could be dangerously cold, and fires were only allowed in calm weather, but then the lack of fresh air below deck could still cause carbon poisoning. And what was discovered to be of use on this journey was the Columbian Exchange.
Number 7, the Terracotta Army. Well, we all have that favorite thing we love. For me, it's video games. I love video games. I'd say comedy, but it's kind of hard to take that with you when you pass away. I'll try though, we'll see. For years, kings and leaders tried their best to take things with them in the afterlife. Egyptians were so worried they had to take their cats and dogs with them. Or at least they tried. They did. Well, very famously, the first emperor of China tried to take a terracotta army with him, or rather an army to protect him in the afterlife. Yes, Emperor Qin was famously buried with soldiers to protect him in the afterlife. Thing is, this wasn't a handful we're talking about, but hundreds in all shapes and sizes, which is really crazy actually. Discovered by farmers attempting to dig a well in 1974, they came to amass a huge burial site with soldiers and cavalry, all with bronze swords that were quickly looted. It makes sense. It's one of the biggest discoveries of all time. In the archaeology department at least. Pretty cool, pretty sick. Number 6, the Nazca Lines. At some point, there was a dude walking in the southern Peruvian desert and saw some lines on the ground and thought, gee, those are some funny looking lines there, huh? And when he went to a higher elevation and looked back at it, well, it looked like it was a larger image, he must have thought to himself. It's probably nothing. Well, once humans had gained the ability to fly, the images were much clearer. In a large portion of the Peruvian desert are long but shallow trenches dug in the ground. The resulting product is images and that of Mesoamerican drawings of animals, like a spider, a monkey, and a bird, and most recently a cat. It's weird. It's weird animals in the ground. I don't know. It's just kind of strange. Question is, who done it? That is the question. That's always the question for archaeology, isn't it? No one is really sure who done it, actually. And it also begs the question, if you were to dig all these drawings, who would see them but God and or aliens? That's kind of a weird thing to understand. Who would see that? No one's up there back then, right? Strange. Number 5, Titanic. Before 1997, the Titanic was one of those aquatic mysteries. For those that have been captivated by its sinking from stories and tales from survivors, people wanted to know her final resting place. And yes, I know it wasn't 1997, but that was when every person on planet Earth knew what the Titanic was. Thanks to Terminator director James Cameron. Kind of a weird thing to do after Terminator, but okay. And teenage heartthrob Leonardo DiCaprio. And maybe a lady, but you know what I'm talking about. It was actually rediscovered on September 1st, 1985 at 3,500 meters below the ocean surface, which if you didn't know is pretty deep down there. It's not every day you discover an unsinkable ship thought to be lost forever at the bottom of the ocean. Pretty exciting. Number 4, remains of Richard III. Richard III, the King of England and Ireland, and if you go by how Shakespeare describes him, well, he's a rotten man, he is, sir. A hunchback with an irregular walk. In real life, well, not so much, but that's because Shakespeare wrote it during the time period when the monarch was the monarch to get rid of the monarch that was Richard III's monarch. It's just good politics, it makes sense. Despite what Shakespeare said about him, he still wasn't great. Who was back then? No one really was. During the many years since the Mad King's passing, it seems his remains were lost. Until one day in 2014, his remains were dug up in a parking lot, of all places. Who would have thought? Just where a king like that would have wanted to be. Kind of strange to dig up one of the country's kings on the day of a construction job. It's kind of weird, you know, just average day and you're like, oh, there's a former King of England. Cool. You know what I mean? It's kind of weird. Number 3, Bigus Cheddicus. How many of you folks like cheese? I'm willing to bet it's a lot of you. I know I do. My favorite is mozzarella, especially from a mom and pop pizza shop or homemade Italian cuisine. Oh, baby, it's the best. I'm not Italian, but I love the communities. Watch out, little Italy, here I come. I'm gonna eat all your pizza. In a recent discovery in Egypt, archaeologists came across ancient cheese of all things. Who would have thought? Which may be the oldest cheese ever to be found. Estimated to be 3,200 years old and composed of goat's milk. While it might be tempting to dive in and take a slice of the cheese, yes, as aristocrats are known to do, I would hold back as it is also found to have bacteria called brucellosis, which is not good for your health. It will make you very sick, so don't eat it. Number 2, I think I stepped in something. I personally find it very fascinating when we dig up something from the past, or really just discover anything from the past. For years, that artifact sat there as the world went on. It's a weird thought for me, I don't know. For me, it's even more impressive if the item is in good condition. It helps give us a better view into the past. Take the 5,000-year-old leather shoe found in an Armenian cave, for example. The laces on this bad boy were still in good condition, which is very impressive. It's a long time. So what's the secret? The shoe was found in a pile of ye olde manure. Supposedly this had some sort of restorative properties on the shoe, although I'm not rushing to try it and I don't recommend anyone else does either. Number 1, Turkish Delight. In 1963, a man was doing renovations on his home. After a trip in 1960s Turkish Home Depot, he began his work. After knocking down a wall, he found a hidden room, which then led to a tunnel. And that tunnel led to the lost city of Derinkuyu. Yes, this man had a whole ancient city right underneath him. Honey, there's an ancient city beneath us! The city proved to be massive, with an estimated population of 20,000 people, complete with livestock. They weren't there, obviously, it's just what they thought it would hold. So for those of our viewers living in older homes, make sure to check behind your walls. You may have some secrets hidden there. Ooh, wouldn't that be cool? Number 10, the Capuchin Crypt. Rome, Italy. A city with so much history, you can almost taste it in the pasta sauce. Or at least so I'm told. I've never been. I'd love to though. Oh, it'd be great. The Colosseum, the Leaning Tower of Pisa. There's lots to see and from all different eras of history. It's pretty cool. Imagine what still hasn't been found or what's buried underneath Rome. God, I can only imagine what history's there. Only time will tell. Well, today I'm talking about the Capuchin Crypt, which, for you sports fans out there, is a church that's chock full of bones and skulls of real-life human beings. Nice! Today it makes for an interesting tourist attraction, but for me, there's something slightly off-putting about looking at skulls and bones and then going for a light lunch. Let's go for a light lunch after this. Yeah, let's go. Number 9, Russia, World War II. World War II was and still is the greatest human event in history. Stories of horror, loss, brutality, but also tales of heroism, bravery, and camaraderie. The efforts taken on by every nation, every state, every man, and every woman should not go unnoticed. Teamwork was crucial on every level. The United States of America did her part. No one can deny that. However, no one can also deny the toll that the Soviet Union paid as our allies. The Eastern Front saw some of the worst battles of the war and some of the worst of humanity. Sometimes we can be awful. However, when things started to go in the Allies' favor, it was becoming clear that while the Allies were liberating German-occupied nations, the Soviets, well, they were really just replacing them, and in some cases even worse. The dark discovery here is that some leaders of the Soviet Union had ulterior motives in mind besides freedom and were simultaneously working against the Allies as well as with them. It's kind of a bad situation. Number 8, bone tools. Human beings, the Homo sapien, bipedal ape-like creatures that require antiperspirant after a few hours of brisk walking. I know I do. A towel too. We've been around for thousands of years. While the study of ancient Rome and Greece is very exciting, and I'm always interested to find out more, the study of cavemen and early humans is also very exciting. We're weird creatures. Like when we find tools used by our ancestors, stone tools that are made with a surprising amount of precision. Seriously, I don't know if I could do that. However, we also find bone tools, which, you know, it makes sense. We hunted a lot of animals back then, so it was important to use, all the parts of the animal. It makes perfect sense. However, some tools that have been found were not animal bones, but human bones. Yes, that's right. We were using tools made out of each other. That's not horrifying. I don't know what is. Number 7, Mummy Workshop. Here's a recent discovery for you. Archaeologists in 2018 discovered a well-preserved embalming workshop complete with labeled oils. Ooh. What's an embalming workshop, you ask? Well, it's the place where kings go to shed a few pounds. Ooh. By that, I mean have their organs removed to be pickled in jars for the afterlife. My favorite part of this process is removing the brain. Cause, you don't need that. Lots of folks walk around without those all the time. Basically, you get a long hook surgical tool and you find the good pink stuff up here through the nose. After stirring the pharaoh's memories like an Italian baker mixing bread dough, you flip the royal over and just let that all drain out until she's empty. I legitimately get queasy when talking about this stuff, that's not a joke, I seriously do. But you know what, I'm glad we found the place and smarter people than I understand it. All I know is that if an Egyptian embalmer asks you to lick the spoon, you say no. Don't do it.
Number 6. Construction Manifest. You know, a lot of people include the Great Pyramids of Giza on their list of Egyptian discoveries. But like, how could you miss them? You know? What stumped people about the pyramids is how they were built. So for our next discovery, how about the discovery of a port in 2013 that had a piece of papyri? Isn't that so much more exciting than a massive 138-meter tall building? The piece of papyri actually was a sort of manifesto for those massive buildings. It basically said the limestone used in the Great Pyramid was shipped from a quarry at Tura to Giza along the Nile River. It also said that it took 4 days, and it talked a little bit about how long Khufu was in charge of Egypt and the guy who was in charge of building the pyramids. See, it's very exciting.
Number 5. Can't take it with you. In life, you live and then you pass on. If you believe in the home sense signs your mom hangs up in her kitchen, then there's going to be a lot of living, laughing, and loving with that. Ancient Egyptians believed in taking things with them to the afterlife. Yeah, pretty much everything was coming with them. Gold, treasure, organs, except the brain, and pretty much just anything you would need for that kind of adventure. Well, animals were no different. Oftentimes when discovering tombs of kings in the main chamber, or sometimes in their own, were statues of cats and dogs, and naturally, mummified kitties and doggies. Now, I love my pets just as much as the next guy, but a discovery in 2019 revealed a tomb with statues, mummies, and even some preserved crocodiles. Ooh, weird. That's a weird pet.
Number 4. Tomb KV5. Sometimes you pass things off without giving them the proper time and attention. Like the fact that your middle toe on one of your feet is a little longer than the same one on the other side, and you're like, it's probably fine, but it's actually a mutation that all of your ancestors had, and it's the reason you can walk faster than everyone else. Not that that's happened to me or anything, but the archaeologists of Tomb KV5 know what I'm talking about, sort of. Basically, KV5 was not studied very well, and in 1995 it turns out that it was actually one of the largest tombs ever created in the Valley of the Kings. So far, we have found around 121 chambers and corridors, and we think there will be 150 total. The tomb was used for the sons of Ramses II, who, as we know, had over 100 kids, so the size of the tomb kind of checks out. So far, we've only confirmed 6, but there are likely to be around 20 of his sons down there.
Number 3. The Pyramids of Giza.
A lot of people include the Great Pyramids of Giza on their list of Egyptian discoveries, but like, how could you miss them?
Okay, obviously people can see these bad boys from miles away. It would be kind of hard to lose something like that, as Adam said. But then again, as a man, I take pride in losing my car keys every time I need to use them. But more specifically, it was the discovery of the inner chambers of the pyramids that really kicked off archaeology. The verdict? Well, these pyramids not only hold riches, and riches of historical knowledge, but the engineering involved is out of this world, which, is kind of how some people think they were constructed today. The complexity and craftsmanship still has people scratching their heads. As for me, I believe that with enough careful planning and engineering, mixed in with a whole heap of forced labor, you can just get about anything done. There's still much to be learned about these giants in the desert. Ooh.
Number 2. Aten. Even today, we are still making huge discoveries in Egypt. I mean, maybe not specifically today, April 27th, or whenever you watch this, but in this day and age. In 2020, we discovered a 3,000-year-old city buried in the sand, and it's probably the biggest discovery since our #1 spot. The city named Aten, or the Rise of Aten, is the largest city of its kind that we have found and gives us a really good look at life during Egypt's most profitable era. That would be the rule of Amenhotep III. Amenhotep IV is his son, who would drastically change the country's direction. Following his father's death, the fourth changed his name to Akhenaten, abandoned the old Egyptian gods besides the sun god Aten, and moved the royal seat from Thebes to the new city of Akhetaten, which is known as Amarna. He was a weird one, but this city wasn't weird. It was impressive, with an administration area as well as residential districts, production area where mud bricks, amulets, and other goods for buildings and temples were made, along with a bakery. Yeah, I love my croissants covered in sand too.
Number 1, King Tut, the man, the myth, the legend. Besides the pyramids, the sand, and the hot sun, nothing is more famous out of Egypt than King Tut. Well, why is this? Is he not just another royal bro who's just big chilling in his tomb? Yeah, sort of, but his tomb is very unique actually. Unfortunately for Egyptians and archaeologists alike, a lot of the tombs have been cleaned out by grave robbers and crooks, some of which are just long gone. The stuff could have been heisted at any point really, we're just not sure. King Tut's tomb, however, was pretty well untouched, and because of this, we got the chance to learn about a king who really didn't do too much. I think the sarcophagus stands out the most, the gold and the blue. It's beautiful. I love it. It's good aesthetic.
Number 10 is the pyramids of Chichen Itza. These ancient Mayan pyramids are obvious ones to end up on our list. This ancient structure has long since been connected to aliens. Many believe that they helped build the structure, but also use them as markers for landing space vessels. There's of course a theory as well though that the top of the pyramid has emitted a powerful energy beam, enabling the ancient Mayans to communicate with aliens or other pyramids around the world, implying the potential of interconnectedness between multiple pyramids and civilizations that we'll talk about through this video. Number 9 is the Vastu architecture. These temples in India contain intriguing alien-like depictions carved on their stone walls. People flying, alien-esque figures, strange flying devices, the whole alien shebang. So one theory for this is that aliens visited ancient Indians and these interactions are depicted on their stonework now as a result. And to tack onto that, some believe that when these aliens shared their flying technology, the Indian people began to worship them as their gods. Naturally, we circle back to the concept of pyramids and grand temples being built to having the ability to harness energy from above to communicate with aliens or other civilizations as well. But it's being said that these temples were constructed with specific design given in old Hindu texts known as Vastu Shastra, and the texts give intensely specific considerations to astronomy in its design, basing it off of all the movements of the stars and planets. So maybe a space laser being emitted from the temple isn't too far off. The gods, architectural methods, and advanced technology may not confirm the existence of aliens coming to Indian land, but at least can raise some suspicion. Anyways, the temples show similarities to the depiction of an ancient Indian flying machine called Vin Amas, which will be number 8 on the countdown. Script from over 2,000 years ago in India claimed dozens of accounts of people seeing these flying machines. They're described differently in some accounts. Man-made wings like a plane, a disc shape, and a famous cloud palace depiction. The Sanskrit word Vinmanana, when translated, literally means measuring out, traversing. In short, it means some form of aircraft. When 8 chapters of this ancient document are translated from Sanskrit, they revealed an intriguing list of these features that the devices had, such as remote images on screens, remote sounds. To protect itself, it had the ability to disguise itself as a cloud or create terrifying sounds. The discussion on Vimamana includes various constructions to double as boats or even submarines. There's discourses on atmospheric pressure, aeronautic hazards, and even dietary and clothing for aviators. These writings were no manifestations or metaphors. They talked about how the gods rode them, but anyone may ride and own one as well. They were treated as manufactured physical objects or even flying houses. For this much ancient text to be translated and have so much modern ideology and inventions, well, it must be aliens, or perhaps some ancient sci-fi stories, or perhaps now we see these objects with hindsight and try to fit them into something that makes more sense to us now, such as an airplane. But they're just anything but, and we'll never know.
Number 7. Million-year-old plant. Back in 2019 in Greenland, a preserved fossil of a million-year-old plant was discovered, and it looks a little nice. It was tucked away under the ice near a secret Cold War military camp. An ancient flower was found at a Cold War military camp. What a headline that is. Look, that's a message. That's definitely a message. In 1959, Project Iceworm was underway. I've mentioned this before, I'm sure, on this channel, and that in itself is a pretty bizarre Frozen feature in history. Now, eventually, said project was scrapped and it was abandoned fully, but cut to 2019, it was rediscovered. Scientists at the University of Vermont found parts of a million-year-old plant just lying around, which is honestly not what they expected to find under a secret Cold War base. You know, they're like, oh, that's actually quite lovely and not haunting and military. Nice. We love that. The fragments were so well preserved that it looked like it died recently, you know? Not a million years old. This would make for a great corsage. If you're going to prom and you're Captain America, this would be kind of fitting. Shout out to Captain America. He always comments on our videos. You're an OG. Studying these plants also can provide us clues on our future and where our current plants might end up. Frozen and lost to history, apparently. Can't wait. Number 6, frozen treasure. As far as frozen treasure goes, this is very recent. We don't find these often. Treasure frozen in ice. This sounds like something from Ocarina of Time. Again, I want to like throw a heat arrow at it and watch it melt. What's inside? Let's do it. Back in 2013, an anonymous mountain climber, can't imagine why they chose to stay hidden, they stumbled across this box. This box filled with jewels that was just jammed in the ice. Yeah, they had to breathe on it a bit, melt it up, but alas, once reported to the French officers, this box contained around 100 precious gems. This was quite the find. Emeralds, sapphires, rupees. This thing was worth at least $300,000 US, roughly. I find a 20 on the ground, that's it. I'm calling in sick. I'm rich, I won the lottery. So where did this treasure come from? Well, since it was discovered on Mount Blanc, officials were able to trace the lost gems back to an Air India flight that sadly crashed on the mountain back in 1966. Of course, the lives of 117 passengers were lost, and because of the conditions, it's been next to impossible to recover anything from the mountain, especially that long ago, right? It's buried. Somehow, these family gems were able to see the light again. And yes, the owner did return the gems. Only 2 families claimed the goods, so, you know, they gotta fight it out, I guess. Interestingly enough, in 2014, a French treasure hunter, Daniel Roche, found 50 more pieces of jewelry from the same glacier, so I don't know, start licking that ice. You might find some diamonds. Who knows? How many licks does it take to get rich? Start breathing on it, pull out a 5. I'm like, yes, it's worth it. Number 5, 90 million year old rainforest. Yeah, we talked about flowers, but now let's get some more flowers in there. Back in 2020, while we were all catching up on Ozark, fossil traces in West Antarctica were discovered. Now this time, it wasn't a giant beaver or a bloody waterfall or anything weird. This time, it was lovely. This time, it was an ancient rainforest. 90 million years ago, when dinosaurs walked the planet, Antarctica was a paradise, honestly. Researchers compare Antarctica in the Cretaceous period to New Zealand today, with most days on average of 12 degrees Celsius. You know, it's like Seattle. I like how scientists compare eras with modern day cities. They're like, oh, the Ice Age? Yeah, a lot of Regina energy over there. A lot of burr, a lot of Regina burr, a lot of Western Canada. I mean, that's where we end up finding them, so yeah, I guess that does make sense. Number 4, the Glacier Girl. Okay, before you get worried, this next one here is a plane, not a frozen woman, so you can resume your calmness. A P-23 aircraft was discovered in Greenland, surrounded, of course, frozen in ice. Who would have thought? During World War II, July 1942, 6 P-38 fighter planes were ordered to make an emergency landing in Greenland due to lousy weather conditions and, of course, therefore, low visibility. The crew was saved, but the Lockheed had to be abandoned, never to be seen again for 50 years. It was then dug out of 264 feet of snow and ice. It took years to get this plane back up, and she's now known as the Glacier Girl. And in 2007, Lewis Energy CEO Rodney Lewis bought the plane just because he just wanted it, wanted a plane, wanted a frozen glacier gal. Number 3, Grasshopper Glacier. Okay, time to get into a little bit of the gross, shall we? So, wouldn't be a Taylor McWaters list if there weren't bugs in it. Yeah, if you're not a fan of bugs, you can go ahead and skip this one. I'm not gonna take it personally. I'll save my jokes for the next one. A glacier in Montana is home to many grasshoppers and locusts. Yeah, frozen locusts. That's a fun word to say. Yeah, imagine heading to a glacier and you forget bug spray. Yeah, what a fool. You didn't think? Appropriately named Grasshopper Glacier, nice, the mile-long glacier near Crook City holds the remains of extinct grasshoppers. A lot of remains of grasshoppers. These poor guys were traveling to find new life, and they must have got caught up in a blizzard or two. Now they're stuck here for another few 100,000 years or so. This reminds me of those suckers that have like a gross bug in the center. You know, like those like popsicles that have like a scorpion inside, and you're like, oh, interesting. Who buys those? No one buys those, right? Number 2, Western camel bones. Scientific name being Camelops hasturnus, meaning yesterday's camel in Latin. These bones first appeared in 2008 when gold miners were working in Hunter Creek, just 60 miles away from the Alaskan border, when they stumbled across these fabulous bones. What a weird sentence to say. These fabulous bones. Someone walks in, I'm like, it's animals. The last time these bones were operating, on living meat was 75 to 125,000 years ago. The remains were in such great condition because of the offal surrounding ones. It was so cold that scientists could actually extract DNA still. DNA that told us that 10 million years ago, roughly, Western camels split from modern day camels. A long time ago, they were just like, you know what? No. How about that? And finally, number 1, Antarctica Pyramid. I talk about the pyramids of Egypt a lot, so I gotta mix it up a little bit, right? Once I heard about pyramids in Antarctica, I knew what was going on, right? Aliens, confirmed. Pretty much. Save the best for last. Back in 2016, a mountain in Antarctica was trending online, and we all immediately thought it was evidence of an ancient civilization because, well, that's what we want to see, right? That's what we're waiting for. Eric Rignot, a professor at the University of California, reached out to Live Science when this was all unfolding in real time, adding that, quote, pyramid shapes are not impossible. Many peaks partially look like pyramids, but they only have 1 or 2 faces like that, rarely 4. So this one has 4. I don't know.
Number 2, Ramses II with a vengeance. As some of you may know, Ramses II was the greatest of the rulers of the 19th dynasty and second longest reigning pharaoh ever. He lived to the age of 90, was an amazing warrior, leading the armies of Egypt by the age of 22, and has literal tons of statues of himself all over Egypt. He is also probably a lot of people's ancestor since he had 96 sons and 60 daughters, approximately. So yeah, it was kind of a big deal in 1881 when archaeologists discovered his mummy with a whole bunch of other ones in a secret chamber at Deir el-Bahari. Originally, Ramses was buried in the Valley of the Kings, as he should have been. But because of the risk of grave robbings, he was moved to a secret chamber. And then, after his discovery and stay at the museum in Cairo, he was moved again in the 70s, when he got a passport to travel to Paris. This guy gets around.
Number 9, Rosetta Stone. You are too fine to be laying down in bed alone. I can teach you my language, Rosetta Stone. Man, we all miss the old Drake. Girl, don't tempt me. Anyway, speaking of diamonds in the rough, the Rosetta Stone. Pretty shocking and important find. What is it? Well, basically it's a large stone tablet that has the same paragraph written on it in 3 separate languages. Why is this so important, you may ask? Well, it's basically helped us learn everything we know about ancient Egypt. More specifically, translating Egyptian to Greek and then to English. Or, since it was discovered by some of Napoleon's people and forces, it would have been in French. To put it in modern terms, it's as if you were back in grade 11 reading Shakespeare and not understanding a single word, but then the bully in school finds the cliff notes for Romeo and Juliet and decides to do a nice thing and share them with everybody. Yep, that makes sense. Good euphemism. That's a good one.
Number 8, Khufu's ship. When pharaohs passed on into the afterlife, they put a whole whack of stuff inside their tombs that were meant to come with them into the next plane of existence. It's why we see the mummified versions of their favorite cats and dogs, favorite foods, and tons of treasure. Unfortunately, after you're gone and buried, some opportunistic people are gonna bust down your tomb doors and steal all your stuff. I'd like to see those grave robbers steal what Khufu brought with him. In 1954, archaeologists found out that, among other things, Khufu had a 140-foot boat with his name on it, buried in pieces at the base of the Great Pyramid where he was entombed. It was almost perfectly intact, and after digging it out of the ground, they put it on display at the Solar Boat Museum, right next to where it was buried. Hopefully, that's close enough for Khufu to still use it in the afterlife.
Number 7, the city of Baiae. Okay, so Romans, right? I mean, no one does it like the Romans do. Gold, marble, parties. When they sent it, buddy, it was full send. Well, what if I told you that the Romans had a Las Vegas? Well, sort of. Obviously, there wasn't a majestic city in the middle of the desert with slot machines, line dancers, and Elvis Presley, but both cities were both built by corrupt Italian leaders. Oh, look at that. Some of these guys wore armor, and the others wore suits, so it, kind of makes sense. The city of Baiae was a resort town in the modern sense. A lot of Roman emperors, politicians owned villas there, which attracted other wealthy folks. Kind of like Las Vegas. Despite even Caesar himself owning property here, the city now unfortunately rests under the water, where you can find remnants of Roman activity, fragments of street, pottery, statues, coins, the works. It's not every day you get to visit a Roman resort underwater. It's located in the Mediterranean Sea, just west of the Italian coast. It's close enough to the ocean for me. Close enough, I think it counts. Pretty cool. Number 6, Pavla Petri. Similar to Baiae, but on a much more discovered on accident kind of deal. In 1967, a man named Nicholas Fleming was snorkeling in the area and well, just so happened to see some weird stuff that he thought resembled a street. Naturally, when he got out of the water and told everybody, no one believed him. So, yeah, right, you're not telling the truth, yeah? It's not true, you're not, no. But after the area was mapped out in 1968, well, it turns out he was telling the truth. Here was the sunken city of Pablo Petri. What they found there was surprising. There were streets, grids, and foundations of buildings remaining, even a small staircase. With all this evidence present, it's speculated that earthquakes around 1000 BCE are what sunk the city. However, what's most interesting is that it's speculated they were there from around 2800 BCE. So they're there for a long time, and the earthquake took them out. Kinda cool. The earthquakes are not cool, but the story's cool. Number 5, the goblin shark. This animal is why I would hate being a scientist, but also would make for great TV. I get scared easily. It'd be kinda cool. Imagine there was a shark, but Mother Nature wasn't completely sold on the design. Okay, sure, it's fast and lethal and naturally blends into the waters to make an apex predator, but it just needs something more, Mother Nature said. Oh, I know. Let's add nail-like teeth and an extendable jaw. Oh, and a Jedi sixth sense. Yeah, that sounds right. Yes. That is right. The goblin sharks are the weird distant cousin of the shark. They live at the bottom of the ocean floor and eat pretty much whatever they can find down there. They hunt in darkness using their elongated snout that has literally a spider sense when something gets close to it, and a jaw that extends to help them grab food. It's like having Commando Pro from MW2, if anyone remembers that. Remember that one? That was hard. That was a tough perk, man. It got in the way of a lot of things. It just goes to show that there's a lot of weird things at the bottom of the ocean, and it really, I wouldn't be surprised if we find some more weird stuff down there. It's gonna happen one day. Number 4, shipwreck of the San Jose. San Jose was part of the Spanish treasure fleet in the early 1700s, which in case you didn't know, was basically big boats for carrying all their loot and booty back to Spain. These ships were filled with everything of value: spices, tobacco, booze, silver, gems, metals, and most importantly, gold. Oh yes. I mean, that was the reason why they were there. She sank in 1708, but not too far from Colombia. She was eventually found by the Colombian Navy and has since been guarded as a state secret. I wonder why. The estimated value of the loot inside the ship's hull is to be worth around $15 billion US. Wow, that's a lot of money. Number 3, the big squid. This one is simple. In the last couple years, both unmanned expeditions and cameras attached to deep sea drilling rigs have caught footage of giant squids. This is impressive for 2 reasons. 1, their size. I mean, these guys are massive, and well, 2, because of their elusive nature and the fact they live really far down in the ocean, we just don't know that much about them and or have that much footage on them. So we take anything we can get. The largest squid on record from head to, well, tentacle or appendage, whatever you want to call it, measured in at a whopping 43 feet. That's a big squid, man. It's almost hard to imagine creatures living that far down there that big. It's a good thing it's difficult for us to get down there. Not that I have any interest going down there, it's just, I'm not so scared. I'm not scared. I'm a little scared. Number 2, anglerfish. Here's another horror from the depths of the ocean. Folks around my age may recall the anglerfish from the terrifying moment in the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. Movies and media is how I relate to things. Just trust me. Remember the part with the ice cream? Remember he's got the ice cream and he's eating them? Remember that part? Yeah, it's weird. Anglerfish are best known for their third appendage that in some anglerfish possess the ability of bioluminescence, or like a fluffy antenna that kind of just hangs off the forehead. What's the reason for this decorative dancey bit? Well, it's to lure in food, like a fishing lure that we would use. Kind of cool. That's when it strikes with its razor sharp teeth and the most awful surprise attack ever from probably one of the most, if not the ugliest fish out of the ocean. Number 1, crop circles. Most crop circles that you find are found in cornfields in middle America, where people claim that little green men came to visit them in the middle of the night. I swears by it. Well, as some divers discovered in 1995, there were crop circles at the bottom of the ocean. But what could make those? Aliens? No one knew what was causing them. Well, it turns out that in 2011, the mystery was solved. It was actually a cute pufferfish, or I say one. It was actually a species of cute pufferfish that were making art on the ocean floor with their fins in hopes of recruiting a mate. It's a good thing I don't have to use art because I was never good at drawing. It wouldn't go very well. Good thing I got cute little blue eyes. Oh my goodness. Number 10, the Endurance. This one is just incredible. Enter the time of adventurers, when setting sail with a crew of hardy men, and the hopes of discovery was just the way of life. What to discover? Well, that's anything and anywhere, friends. Their fame and fortune await. This was true of Sir Ernest Shackleton, a man who was seeking his own destiny and adventure. He famously boarded a ship called the Endurance and with a motley crew set sail for the Antarctic waters. Things were going great until they weren't. That's a classic line, isn't it? The ship got stuck in ice, and despite the crew's best efforts, the ship was beginning to lose its fight and sank. Miraculously though, all crew survived, including Shackleton. Pretty amazing story. The ship was lost under the icy waters for years, thought to be lost forever. That was until March of this year, March of 2022, it was found, and even more surprisingly, she was mostly intact and preserved due to the frigid temperatures of the water. Ooh, nice. Number 9, Rosetta Stone. What if I told you the reason why we understand so much of the ancient world and ancient Egypt is because of a small dictator from France who had an ego issue? Sounds fake, right? Well, actually, it's true. Napoleon Bonaparte, the Corsican ogre as he was also known, during his reign of fame and military power, he went on tour in Egypt. And I mean, why not? It's hot, sunny, and you got those pyramids. How can you say no? It's beautiful. Well, like something out of Call of Duty Zombies, Napoleon took his army boys and a couple of egghead archaeologists to uncover the hidden secrets. That's when the Rosetta Stone was found. A large stone tablet that was inscribed 3 times with 3 different languages, but all saying the same thing. Thus, it helped us understand and decipher ancient Egyptian language and unlocked many other secrets as well. Pretty shocking find. Number 8, Pompeii. Imagine a sunny day like any other. You're a Roman citizen walking through a market as it hustles and bustles during a bright afternoon. The smell of small restaurants fill the air. The playful sound of friends chatting away charms the background. Then the ground violently shakes and a thick black ash covers the city. Within a few short hours, like a scene from Revenge of the Sith, lava flows everywhere and the people are buried in burning hot ash and smoke. Oof, no thanks, I don't want the Darth Vader treatment. Pompeii is an interesting story. It wasn't rediscovered in one major excavation, but rather people kept walking over it and going, I wonder what this is. And that's pretty much it. Excavation after excavation eventually led to modern scientists to rediscover the city, and in a quite well preserved state actually, surprisingly. An ancient restaurant was found not too long ago, complete with mosaics. That's pretty cool. That's pretty sweet.
While some have warriors, others have the terracotta inscriptions, which is number 7. The Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities announced another discovery in Saqqara, March 17th, 2022. As the title of the video reveals, it's very obviously tombs, specifically 5 of them. All burials date to either Old Kingdom or the first transition/intermediate period, roughly 4,700 to 4,000 years ago. All belong to top officials and dignitaries from respective time periods and are in good state of preservation. Iri, one of the top nobles of the court, had a well-defined pathway leading to his burial room, with the walls adorned with engraved pictures of many funeral scenes painted in bright terracotta and sandstone. Artistically, the colors of the paintings are considered royal colors by officials. Grave number 2 belonged to the wife of a man named Yart. Meanwhile, grave number 3 belonged to a person named Babi Farahafe, who used to occupy several important court positions, namely supervisor of the Great House, the chanting priest, and the cleaner of the house. The 5th cemetery is a man called Hanu, had many titles such as the mayor, and the 6th grave, however, is the most interesting of them as it has the archaeologist a little giddy. A woman called Betty, who is responsible for the king's makeup, appearance, and dressing, and was buried with tons of her cosmetic tools. Allegedly, she is also a priestess of Hathor, who's the goddess of love, beauty, music, fertility, and pleasure. You want to hear something crazy? Number 6 is how they cracked open a tomb and found 100 sealed coffins. It was announced on the 14th of November 2020. It's the largest find of that year. It's 100 sealed coffins and over 40 statues alongside hundreds of mixed artifacts. Naturally, they're discovered at the Saqqara necropolis, and carbon dating tells us that the items date back to the Ptolemaic dynasty that ruled Egypt for some 300 years, from about 320 BC to 30 BC and the late period. The coffins were found inside a burial shaft that had not been opened at all for 2,500 years. The preliminary studies revealed quickly that most of these coffins belonged to 26th dynasty priests, top officials, and elites. A number of wooden statues and colored gilded masks were also found, all in really great condition, and 28 of the statuettes are Ptah Sokar, the main god of the Saqqara necropolis. But there's one very special and unusual statue in this tomb, a bronze statue of the god Nefertiti. The statue is inlaid with valuable precious stones. We're talking red agate, turquoise, jade, and lapis lazuli. It is 35 centimeters tall and has the name of its owner, Badia Muniz, engraved in its base like Andy in Toy Story. I mentioned telling y'all about another keeper of the secret, so that's exactly what number 5 will be. This impressive tomb complex belonged to Keres, a priest and official who was once the most powerful in Egypt, aside from the pharaoh, of course. It was found during an excavation of an unfinished pyramid that's adjacent to 2 extensive necropolises, but the identity of the builder or even the name of the unfinished site is still unknown. On a mission to gain that information, the Czech team were working on the site for only 2 weeks when they made their remarkable and unexpected discovery. The burial complex contains a tomb but also a series of other rooms, and one held a cult chapel which serves as a magnificent example of Old Kingdom architecture. In the tomb room, however, there's a limestone coffin and a statue of Keres, which has been somewhat miraculously preserved in its original location, according to the Czech Institute of Egyptology's report. It even still had some of its original paint. So, the statue is also a source of context in the tomb, revealing the name of Keres and his many titles for us. Based on the inscriptions from the tomb, he was also the sole friend of the pharaoh. This tomb has provided experts with many new insights on the 5th Dynasty era. The discovery of the statue in the tomb was dramatic, as it proved in Old Kingdom at least, they did place statues of the dead in their own tombs. Sadly, this is one of those times where grave goods were looted centuries ago, so not much else remains. For number 4, we'll learn about ancient Photoshop. Thanks to new X-ray scanning methods as announced July 13th of 2022, we now know that some of the pharaoh's paintings have been subtly edited over time. Traditionally, the analysis of ancient Egyptian paintings has been conducted in controlled laboratory environments or museum premises. This new study has instead pioneered a groundbreaking approach. Instead of taking the painting to the lab, bring the lab to the painting. You preserve history, you aren't stealing crap you shouldn't, and nobody gets cursed for tampering. I see nothing but wins here. So the findings focused on 2 paintings from the Ramesside period, which were discovered in tomb chapels located near the Theban necropolis. Through the application of X-ray technology, the team scanned specifically a painting of Ramesses II, unveiling hidden details imperceivable to the naked eye. Previously, scholars speculated the painting depicted the pharaoh grieving the loss of his father. However, the latest scan of the portrait challenges the interpretation, as Ramesses can be seen beneath a cult canopy before the enthroned Ptah. Additionally, there's adjustments to the crown and other royal items in the portrait of Ramesses II, and he's currently depicted wearing a Wekse collar, which was not historically used during his reign. Underneath that new layer of paint is the original painting of a Shebu collar. These modifications likely reflect shifts in the symbolic significance of these elements over time. This finding suggests that ancient Egyptians continuously adapted their artistic expressions to convey evolving cultural and religious ideologies even when pharaohs had passed. This next tomb is a bit more recent and a bit more strange. Number 3 is Pet Cemetery. May 28th of 2023 marked the completion of the 6th excavation season in the Saqqara. They had announced their latest finding: 2 humans and an animal embalming workshop, as well as 2 tombs of notable officials and their wives, all conjoined together. According to the press release from the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, the structures date back to the 30th Pharaonic dynasty to the Ptolemaic period around 2400 years ago. The newest discovered animal embalming workshop was constructed with mud and limestone floors. A number of the rooms and halls were found to contain a large number of pottery, linen, animal embroidery, and different animal burials. Researchers found one room stockpiled with bronze tools used specifically for animal mummification processes, and varying sizes of stone beds used to mummify the most sacred of animals. And then they found the similar room but for humans. So large stone beds ended in gutters to facilitate the mummification process, with the collection of clay pots nearby to hold entrails and organs, as well as a collection of instruments and ritual vessels. Analysis later determined that the chemical residues discovered in these tombs were a mixture of fragrant or antiseptic oils, tars, and resins, according to the ministry. When all of these paints and resins are brought together, including the damar tree resin and the enmi oil, the researchers figured out, quite unusually, that the raw materials were imported from Asia and other regions of Africa. How did we manage to find a queen we didn't know we lost, but we're still out searching for Nefertiti and Cleopatra? Irony of life. Number 2 is unearthed but unknown. What are the chances that on the 100-year anniversary of unearthing King Tut's tomb, archaeologists discovered hundreds of tombs and mummies buried in Giza? This genuinely happened on November 4th of 2022, and even crazier, it's attached to a pyramid of a never-before-known ancient Egyptian queen. So, to quote Zahi Hawass, most burials known in the Saqqara previously were either from the Old Kingdom or late period. Now we have 22 interconnected shafts shafts ranging 30 to 60 feet, all with New Kingdom burials. AKA, this is an unusual but incredible find. Buried within these shafts, archaeologists found huge limestone sarcophagus alongside 300 beautiful coffins, Hawass said. The coffins have individual faces, each one unique, distinguishing between men and women, and are decorated with scenes from the Book of the Dead. Each coffin also has the name of the deceased and often shows the 4 sons of Horus who protected the organs of the deceased. This shows that mummification reached its peak in the New Kingdom, still quoting Hawass. Some coffins have 2 lids, and most amazing coffins so far had the mask of a woman made completely of solid gold. In addition, they found a pyramid commemorating a previously unknown queen. We have since discovered that her name was Neith, and she had never before been known from historical record. It is amazing to literally rewrite what we know of history, adding a new queen to our records. While much of the life of the real Queen Neith still remains unknown, the discovery of her pyramid is likely to provide significant insight into her role. This tomb's discovery was far grander than that of Tut's, yet war overshadowed its discovery, making it back page news. Well, today it gets its rightful attention as number 1. It's the Silver Pharaoh. To start some context, in ancient Egyptian culture, gold was considered the flesh of the gods, while silver was believed to be their bones. Gold was abundant in ancient Egypt, making silver more valuable as it had to be imported from Western Asia and the Mediterranean. Okay, now story time. So, amidst the chaos of the Second World War in Western Europe, a French archaeologist found the world's most fabulous tomb at the world's worst time. As said, the discovery is largely overshadowed despite its magnitude, somewhat understandably as European societies preoccupied with escalating conflict. What amped the magnitude of this find was that the pharaoh was entombed in a solid silver coffin, a massive testament to immense wealth and power that we've never seen in another Egyptian tomb since. Bonus points for the silver anthropod coffin being found in a pink granite coffin, which in turn was encased within a plain granite sarcophagus. Unlike Tut's body, however, Montet only ever found a pile of bones, black dust, and funerary items like the gold mummy board and a spectacular gold mask that would have covered the pharaoh's face and given Tut a run for his mummy. Get it? This loss sadly was from groundwater seeping in through to the mummy, and most of the wooden items entombed also deteriorated over time. Nonetheless, Montet was able to recover several non-perishable items such as canopic jars and shabatis, along with precious objects inside the sarcophagus, treasures that rival Tut's in their worth. When considering the wealth of the objects found in Susin's tomb, along with the duration of his reign, it appears that a reassessment of the situation in Egypt during the 3rd intermediate period, or at least during the reign of Sunised, the Silver Pharaoh, is long overdue.
Starting our list off at number 10, microwave. I can't say microwave anymore. I have to say microwave because of this video.
Milk, full fat, which I've warmed in the microwave.
Thanks to this first invention on our list today, I can eat Hot Pockets anytime I want. Not all inventions allow you to accomplish such a feat. Percy Spencer changed the science and snack game. He was originally an American engineer working for Raytheon, but Percy also loved a snack on the site. So he had a chocolate bar in his pocket one day. He was saving it for later, but when he walked in front of a magnetron, the chocolate bar in his pocket, well, it sadly melted. But luckily for us, after a few follow-up experiments in 1945, we now get microwave ovens. And it's always a good time. It wasn't until 1967, mind you, where microwaves were in our actual homes, because of course it took a little while to narrow down. But yeah, nowadays it's great. We almost forget we have one now. It's perfect. Number 9. Super glue. I feel like we're using super glue now more than ever in history. Activists are gluing themselves to tables, streets, you name it. But who do we have to thank for such a sticky substance? Back in 1942, inventor Dr. Harry Coover was working on plastic sights for weapons. Now, this was intended to help Allied forces during World War II, but while working on these clear plastic sights, he made super glue instead. Now, obviously, he was a little busy at the time, so he shelved this invention for 9 years before returning back to the lab. Superglue didn't completely come out until 1958. It took 16 years to get to our shelves. And it's still there. We use superglue to fix everything, even the occasional social issue, it appears. Number 8, pacemaker. Here we go. This one's a tad more exciting than superglue, dare I say. A pacemaker. Odds are you know somebody with one of these right now. It all started in 1956 when Wilson Greatbach was trying to record the rhythm of the heart. Not the song, the actual rhythm of the actual heart. That's the dumbest joke I've ever put in anything in my entire life. But after installing the wrong piece by mistake, he actually realized that the circuit was emitting these pulses, these heartbeat type pulses. So he thought, well, maybe I can create a device small enough for a body and actually stimulate an actual heartbeat. Cut to 1958, a dog was the first ever proud owner of one pacemaker. He's walking around, he's like, hey, life's rough.
Speaking of Saqqara, everyone wanted to sit at Teti's table. A century after the discovery of King Tut's tomb made headlines around the world, in the sweltering desert heat outside of Cairo, archaeologists have found a giant trove of ancient coffins and mummies, along with the ceramic amulets believed to have been used in burial rituals and thick papyrus documents so big that they're full of secrets. Egyptologist Zahi Hawass told NBC News on November 2nd of 2022 that the site contained countless artifacts related to the pharaoh King Teti and his followers who worshipped him as a god for over 1,000 years after his death. Obviously, being worshipped as a god, this is the guy you want to be buried next to, right? Even the remains of King Tut's closest generals and advisors were at the site, which sits about 20 miles south of the North African national's capital. I really believe that this year and next year, this site is going to be the most important site in Egypt, said Hawass, obviously referring to the network of underground rooms hidden 65 feet beneath the oldest pyramids in Egypt. I always say that we found until only now 30% of our monuments are still there. 70% are buried underneath the ground. Adding in that his team had also found close to 300 coffins in the vicinity of the pyramid this year alone. Next is the most bizarre story yet. It's out to lunch? First reported on February 25th of 2023, this headline definitely turned some heads, including mine. A man stopped for drinking publicly in a park in Peru was also found to be in possession of more than just a container of beer. Juan Cesar Bajero, 26, had a 600 to 800-year-old mummy in a cooler bag style backpack. Makes sense to have since he's a food delivery person, but what doesn't make sense is cramming a mummy into it and showing it off to two of your friends while in the park on a casual Saturday. When asked by police to justify the presence of the mummified corpse in his bag, Juan's response was, I take care of her and she takes care of me. Apparently, he's also named her Juanita and started calling her his spiritual friend. It's unclear how the man came to be in possession of the mummy. Mummification was a common practice among several cultures in Peru before the arrival of Spanish conquistadors in the 16th century. In November of 2021, archaeologists in Peru had discovered a mummy believed to be up to 1,200 years old in an underground tomb, so really any earthquake, landslide, or curious cave explorer could just stumble across a mummy there. Joke's on Juan, however, authorities say the mummy is believed to be a male. Unless that doesn't bother him. Anyways, it's now in possession of Peru's Ministry of Culture, and Juan has been charged with illegal possession of historical patrimony and could face 5 years in jail. Next up is a timestamp error. Oops! Made a carbon dating error. Now we have to rewrite all of mummy history. Just a regular Tuesday. Kind of the case with the mummy Kwemi, a high-ranking aristocrat that was discovered in 2019 and assumed to be only a few thousand years old at first, but howdy doody, in 2022, it's proven to be far older than previously thought, and we are talking one of the oldest Egyptian mummies ever unearthed. It dates to the Old Kingdom, demonstrating that mummification processes were highly advanced 4,000 years ago, which is 1,000 years earlier than previously thought. This tomb now suggests that ancient Egyptians living during the time of the Old Kingdom between 2700 BC and 2200 BC were already carrying out sophisticated burials. The intricacy of the body's mummification method and materials, particularly its very fine linen dressing and high-quality resin, was supposed to have taken 1,000 years for them to be able to produce. Professor Salima Ikram, who's head of Egyptology at the American University in Cairo, told The Observer magazine this would completely turn over our understanding of the evolution of mummification on its head. The materials used, their origins, and trade routes associated with them dramatically impact our understanding of the Old Kingdom Egypt. If this is indeed an Old Kingdom mummy, all books about mummification and the history of the Old Kingdom would need to be revised. Meet the Peruvian pre-Inca mummy, more than 1,000 years old and found on the outskirts of the modern capital. November of 2021. The mummy was probably a youngerish person from what they've gathered, and found in an underground tomb wrapped in a funerary bundle along with ceramics and rope, naturally including little bits of skin and hair around, While best known for the mountaintop of Machu Picchu, Peru was home to various pre-Hispanic cultures that thrived in the centuries before the Incan Empire rose to power. The mummy was discovered about 200 meters from where the first mummy of Cajamarquilla was found, explained the archaeologist Yomira Huaman. This particular archaeological site is where the remains of 20 people who were apparently sacrificed about 800 to 1200 years ago were found. This recent discovered mummy in particular lived between 1100 and 1200 years ago and might have belonged to the Lima or Ichima culture. Cajamarquilla complex features the ruins of 4 pyramids and other constructions such as walls laid out like mazes, apartment buildings. The complex is the second largest mud brick city in Peru and was possibly occupied occupied by people from the coast and the Andean highlands. Never thought I'd see the day. It's the Van Gogh mummy? Emphasize on that question mark because that's just straight weird, but he does, in some people's opinion, bear resemblance to one of the unnamed 35 mummified bodies that were found during the restorative work on the Church of the Assumption of Our Lady in Quinto Village. The burials were unearthed in 2011 when part of the floor of the church was removed to install a heating system. Imagine being one of the workers finding that while tearing up floorboards. All mummified bodies were then stored in the chapel of the church until a 2014 project was finally launched to study and restore the collection, and a lab was created on site. Mummified naturally thanks to the very dry soil, the bodies date from 18th until mid-19th century based on the clothing of the mummies. In the region of Aragon, which Quinto belongs to, there were several epidemics. In the 18th century, smallpox and yellow fever ravaged the region. In the 19th century, it was cholera that claimed lives, so it's likely disease was the primary cause of these people's demise. According to Raffaella Biccacciui, a bioanthropologist in the legal medicine section of the University of Turin, the mummy's excellent state of preservation allows for a minimally invasive in-depth study of skeletal and soft tissue pathologies. They plan to share their findings at the World Congress on Mummy Studies. By that time, we hope we can give a name to the Van Gogh mummy and more about his life. Look out, James Bond, here comes Gold Tongue. So, it was December of 2021 when archaeologists unearthed two tombs, one of which had never been opened, a huge rarity in ancient Egyptian standards, and they contained the mummified remains of a man and woman who died about 2,500 years ago. The sealed tomb held the mummified remains of the man and included items such as a scarab amulet, 4 canopic jars, and more than 400 pieces of funerary figures. The mummy's face was also well preserved, with a golden leaf tongue inside its mouth. In ancient Egypt, embalmers sometimes crafted tongues from gold foil and placed them inside the mouths of the dead to enable them to speak with the god Osiris. But these have only been found in archaeological sites in Alexandria and El Balnasa. The other tomb, which had already been raided by grave robbers around the time of its actual burial, held a sarcophagus in the shape of a woman, and the mummified remains were just trashed. 2 more gold tongues were found though, one inside the woman's mouth. The 3 gold tongues found in the tomb date to the Roman period that began in 30 BCE, and scientists hope these new discoveries will allow them to better understand the funerary rites observed during this time period. And now for what I feel may be the most exciting on the list, the Ming mummy. Chinese road workers stumbled upon an astonishing find in 2011. While digging several feet into the ground during an excavation of a road, they unexpectedly hit a large solid object about 6 feet below the surface. Uncovering it further, they got that oh crap realization and called in the big dogs. Subsequent investigations revealed that the object was found in Taizhou was in fact a Chinese tomb, containing a 3-layered coffin within its walls and a remarkably intact remains of a woman from the Ming Dynasty dating back 700 years. As the archaeologists opened the main coffin, they were greeted by layers of silk and linen, smells of oil and perfume, and a brown clear liquid that I'm sure the Victorians would have probably slurped up with a crazy straw during their Egyptomania phase. The archaeologists who excavated the coffin, however, were unable to determine whether the mysterious brown liquid was used intentionally to preserve the body, or if it was somehow groundwater that seeped in over time and mixed with stuff. Either way, these are some astonishingly well-preserved remains of a woman, complete with her body, hair, skin, clothes, and jewelry. Even her eyebrows and eyelashes are impeccably preserved, revealing remarkable details about her appearance from centuries ago. Since the discovery, she has come to be known as the Taizhou mummy, aka the accidental mummy. The best part, this woman was not meant to be a mummy. While most mummies discovered today are products of complex process, natural mummification has occurred in rare instances. The Taizhou mummy is an extraordinary example of this, distinguished by its exceptional state of preservation and enigmatic background.
Number 10. The Antikythera device. I think I said that right. The Antikythera mechanism or device, I mean, this sounds like something straight out of Call of Duty Zombies, but the discovery comes to us straight from the magical land of antiquity. The land of marble, democracy, and olive oil. Very nice, beautiful. It's more Italian than Greek, but okay, we're gonna go with it. In 1901, Greek divers found a shipwreck not too far from the island of Antikythera. Naturally, they looked in to see what was inside. Remnants of cargo included pottery, coins, jewels, and a strange gear-like device. Later it was dubbed the Antikythera device. It was also later discovered to be that of a very early analog computer. Ooh. It was a fancy way of saying a basic or manual power computer that calculates simple solutions, or that of a singular solution. It might not sound like much, but to me it's a very unique find. Sure, this machine was simple, but it makes us wonder what else may have been lost to time. It's thought to have been used as an astrological calendar, aiding the user in mapping out where the sun and moon will be on different dates. Pretty cool. I don't know, how do they do that though? That's, you know what I mean? Like, how do they think of that? I couldn't even think of that. I'm a modern guy. Jeez. Number 9, purple orb. I've been around for a little while now, and in my scientific research, I've seen my fair share of orbs. You got Goku's Kamehameha, you got the orbs in Mario Party. Heck, I've chased so many orbs in Call of Duty Zombies, I've lost count. The point I'm making here is, I know an orb when I see an orb. I know one when I see one. The purple orb found at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean floor, not too far from the California coast. Well, frankly, I have no idea what this is, said also the scientist who discovered it in 2016 while exploring the ocean floor. Scientists discovered a purple spherical blob, aptly named Blobus purpurus. You can't get better than that, folks. Naturally, using a very high-tech device called a vacuum, we sucked that bad boy up like a farmer gets sucked up in a UFO in the middle of a cornfield in Arkansas. For further analysis, of course. What else? The verdict? We ain't too sure yet. It could be some form of sea slug, but if that's the case, it's the first purple one ever caught, showing that if you look hard enough, you can find shiny Pokemon too. Number 8, the Megalodon. This one goes out to all the people who went to see a movie called Jaws in the 70s and had no idea what they were in for. I can only imagine what kind of pants-soiling experience that must have been. For our younger audience to understand, there just wasn't any movie like Jaws around back then. It was pretty unique. A summer blockbuster, and it changed film forever, honestly. It also made people think twice about going into deep water at the beach. You never know. I know that was a movie, but you never know, said people. Well, what if I told you Jaws weren't too far from the truth? Yes, that's right, folks. Fossils have been found dating back to 20 million years ago, and these fossils belong to that of the mega shark, the Megalodon. A great white shark is anywhere between 4.5 meters to around 8 meters at the most. The Meg, as she's commonly called, she's estimated to be around 17 meters. That's over 50 feet in American, folks. That's a big fish, man. While a full fossil has never been found, teeth and some bone paint an image of a very beastly fish. Not one I want to cross. I just stay out of the water. I like water, but I like swimming pools, chlorine. I'd rather swim in pee than with sharks. Okay, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm here to tell you, folks.
Alright, now it's the drought remains part 2. Only a couple months passed from those announcements, and now the remnants of the royal site La Isabela bathhouse, part of a small waterside community that began to emerge in 2022, are almost completely above ground now. This time last year, Spanish reservoirs were at 40% capacity on an average in early August. Beforehand, it was a 10-year average of around 60%. Now they are sitting at 22%. La Isabela was a spa town located on the banks of the Guadalquivir River. This spot was patronized by the Roman city nearby and called Santa Bear, aka Well of Health, by Arabian people. Accurately so, because people came to seek relief from various diseases such as gout, epilepsy, seizure, rheumatism, skin eruptions, and so the site became a pilgrimage but also a locals haven. There were about 50 houses, all with many rooms for visitors and residents who were going to benefit from the thermal spa water. As in so many spas, its waters could be taken as a drink or in a bath. People preferred to use this particular spring as a drink despite the bad taste that sulfurous hot springs often have, even at low temperatures. Over the years, 2 casas, a church, and a few fountains that adorned the streets were added. In the immediate vicinity was a large orchard, and all the vegetation in the valley was very abundant, similar to that found in valleys that cross La Acaria. Then in 1942, the decision is made to douse the village and make it a reservoir. Since then, it's been under the waters, and now those waters sit at a 22% capacity. We are officially in the middle of the list, which means pizza fresco break. This is neither unsettling nor scary. I just desperately need some dopamine, so share the exciting news with me that on June 27th of 2023, the Italian ministry said, alright, we have something to show you, but please don't freak out. And they revealed to us this. It is a still life fresco, unearthed in Pompeii, of a pizza. Okay, well, it's not a pizza. Italian Culture Ministry announced that it's what looks like a pizza. I guess technically the fresco depicts a flatbread, because a pizza includes tomato and mozzarella, according to them. The ancient origins of flatbread dates back to approximately 14th 14,500 years in Jordan's Black Desert region, suggesting they've actually been part of the human culinary history for tens of thousands of years. As proven, showing up all over the world, all through the centuries, all in different ways. In the case of these Grecian flatbreads, they'd be eaten with pomegranates or dates, or dressed up with spices and a type of pesto sauce, which looked to be atop the bread, not baked onto it. A wine goblet and other fruits are depicted on the same tray. The oldest recorded reference to a pizza-like dish can actually be traced back to ancient Greece in the 5th century BC. In the gastronomic poem Hedipithia, the Greek poet Archestratus mentioned a dish called plakos, which is a form of flatbread topped with various ingredients. Pretty good pizza break, right? Yeah, now back to calamity. Let's talk about how they just completed the 6th Saqqara excavation. That's right, round 6 of tearing apart Egyptian tombs in the necropolis so that the British Museum, the people of the world can have access to the ancient treasures and secrets of the past. The information revealed to us on January 26th of 2023 is that not only did they find some mummies, beautiful artifacts, and hieroglyphics, but also an animal embalming and mummification workshop. The newly discovered animal embalming workshop was constructed with mud and limestone floors. A number of rooms and halls contained pottery, linen animal embroidery, and different animal burials. One room had a collection of bronze tools used for said mummifications and 5 stone beds for the most sacred of Egypt's animals to be mummified on. These would be cats or baboons or even a hippo. As for the peoples, they found 2 tombs. Tomb 1 is someone called Nihasaba, and Tomb 2 went by Menkeber. The names of these men and their wives are painted in the tomb, and alabaster statues are found painted in vibrant blues, catching their once live image. A campy classic hero has had his homeland found. Next up will be Conan Comes Home. June 24, 2023 is our latest update on the 14th year of excavation in the central Kırklareli province of Turkey. That update, Japanese archaeologist Kiyoshi Matsumura revealed that the Buklakale village, which is divided into upper and lower, was the first settlement of the Sumerians, an ancient equestrian nomadic people in Anatolia. Artifacts discovered at the site corroborate this, while also revealing the evidence of warfare within the constructed fortress. On the top layer, we found remnants from the Ottoman period. Below that, we found artifacts from the Hellenistic period, the time of Alexander the Great's arrival. Beneath that, we identified architectural remains, but before that we found traces of the Lydians. Below that, we found the fortress constructed by the Sumerians, which is what we were aiming for. And beneath that, we discovered settlements dating back to 2000 BC in the Hittite period. Currently, we have reached that level, Kiyoshi had explained. Located at a strategic point along Turkey's longest river, the community was inhabited from the early Bronze Age to the Ottoman era and served as a natural bridge throughout history. This city has played a crucial role at the crossroads between East and West. The Sumerians naturally are known best for their military prowess and their raids on neighboring kingdoms, and Conan the Barbarian. Our older audience definitely remembers the campy classic from 1982 where they tried to convince us Arnold Schwarzenegger could do a German accent. He could not. Anyways, glad we found your home and proved to doubtful historians the Sumerians actually existed, Conan. If they thought to look sooner, more would be left, but for now we're making the most of the Stonehenge grave sites. Many countries have laws in place that archaeologists have to do sweeps of areas before any development can be done. Too many incidents like the terracotta soldiers, Rosetta Stone, and the rune stones in the floorboards have occurred. It's a great law, and one that allowed for the discovery of the burial site right near Salisbury, England. This unearthed burial mound and tombs are from prehistoric times, approximately 4,000 years old. These types of mounds are known as barrows or round barrows, and they were most commonly made as a tomb cover and a grave marker during the Beaker and early Bronze Ages of 2400 to 1500 BC. The archaeologists found enough clues to conclude these barrows had been made during the later period, meaning they were installed 1,000 years or more after the monuments at Stonehenge were erected just 10 miles away. But let me add some heat, y'all. One of the burial mound's ditches showed clear signs of having been altered from slightly ovular to circular, with the latter representing the normal British Bronze Age preference. Based on the changed design, the archaeologists speculate that the oval-shaped barrow may have originally constructed during the British Neolithic period, 4100 to 2500 BC. This suggests the cemetery actually predates the early Bronze Age, and the burials may have taken place there for several centuries before the Bronze Age tomb was installed, aka before Stonehenge was assembled. Holy but the spice level still ain't enough, so let me pour some more on ya. What also makes this oval to circle tomb widely significant is it's a mass grave and it's the center of the circle. Archaeologists note that this type of group burial is most uncommon, and they are anxious to complete radiocarbon dating on the remains found and learn more about how the people in the grave lived and died. Whenever Poland shows up in archaeology news, about 50% of the time it's because they found more new vampire graves. Publicized in the first week of June 2023, archaeologists in Poland have excavated what's being called a mass suspected vampire grave. How can they tell? Probably the fact that 450 skeletons casually have their heads lodged between their legs, coins in their mouths, and bricks surrounding them. You know, the usual Polish techniques that were found on other vampire grave sites in that country in 2014 and 2016 and 2017 and 2022 and now in 2023. Suffice to say, after all the other vampire graves, the archaeologists are kind of in the habit of this now and can identify the obvious signs pretty quickly. In a Daily Mail article, archaeologist Maciej Skromski explained that in rural 19th century Poland, it was a common practice to behead vampires. Moreover, the act of placing the coin in the mouth was believed to negate the vampire curse and spreading its disease amongst the living. People also believed that certain types of brick prevented vampires from returning from the dead. In this case, over 30% of the 450 bodies had bricks on them. The archaeologists explained that people believed members of the deceased's family that died shortly after the vampire's funeral might also be vampires. Therefore, after burial, a grave could be dug up and the deceased's head cut off, which was then placed between the legs. But in the case of those who were suspected of being vampires themselves, evidence of decapitation after burial is rare. Take what you will from that. And of course, the very last on our list is the one I'm insanely excited about. They call it Netherlands Stonehenge. Even though the site near Tiel was discovered in 2017, the archaeologists weren't certain about what it was. There's scattered grave sites, mounds, and other fascinating installations. Complicating things further, approximately 200 archaeologists participated in the digs at the site at one time or another, leading to the work not being well coordinated and important findings not always shared. Ultimately, Kristen van der Linde from BAAC Archaeological and History Research pulls it together with his team, and they're able to now confirm the location was an ancient religious complex over 4,500 years ago. When did they confirm this? Drumroll please. 6 days ago. This amazing site, which some are already referring to as the Netherlands Stonehenge, has earned this title quickly because, like Stonehenge, the various features of the complex were carefully built to align with the sun, planets, or stars, or to signal important astronomical events. Also, like Stonehenge, marking the arrival of summer and winter solstice appeared to be a major priority. Archaeologists working at the site have discovered approximately 80 burials so far, and in case I'm not visibly vibrating with excitement yet, one of the graves contained a glass bead that was imported from ancient Mesopotamia, the oldest bead found in the Netherlands, and proof that the Bronze Age trading networks connected Northern Europe with parts of the near ancient East. Despite the tremendous separation in distance, archaeologists have also discovered the remains of animal skeletons, human skulls, and bronze tools and weapons placed in spots close to where the sun shone directly through openings into the complex's central mound. This suggests they're piled up in those locations for ritual purposes, possibly as sacrifices to some ancient forgotten god. It's estimated the site was used as a religious sanctuary for approximately 800 years after its initial construction in the late or early 2nd millennium BC, but it seems occupation continued for a long time after that. Obviously, they've got a lot of work ahead of them to do.